Leon Warden is an average young man who happens to be transported to another world, a classic isekai manhwa premise. From modern Japan to a cold and cruel place where magic and mages exist. His transition occurs a few hours after graduating from school in his original world, having endured a life full of stress and loneliness as the so-called model student. Leon vowed to live his new life, his own way, free from the clutches of academia. Unfortunately for him, his new life doesn't go as he hoped. Born into the Warden family, a prestigious line of noble mages, Leon discovers that all the young men of the family must attend the best magic academy in the new world called Enrogar. With no way to avoid it, Leon applies to the academy and to his disdain, is accepted. On the day of admission, Leon travels silently through the forest alongside his lifelong guard named Ara. Lost in thought, he reflects on the promise his former self made to his spirit, when the magnificent structure of Enrogar, a staple of fantasy manhwa, appears on the horizon. Ara breaks the silence, reminding Leon that they will arrive soon, staying on high alert. Leon travels with Ara to the main gates of the most prestigious magic academy in the Empire. Once inside the academy walls, Ara shares his pride in accompanying Leon, who has grown into a well-built young man. He jokes about his age and frailty, but Leon ignores him, choosing instead to reflect on how bleak his life was in his previous world, particularly on his graduation day. On that fateful day, after receiving congratulations from a friend for finally escaping the clutches of tyrannical professors, the former Leon paused to relive the hardships of his academic life, from being forced to join a professor's hiking club on weekends, to grading papers for lazy professors, and surviving for weeks on poor triangular kimbap. His experiences were exhausting. Despite his friend's praise, Leon felt he was only doing what was expected of him. When his friend asked if he would ever want to relive those moments, Leon emphatically replied no. Although he seemed like the perfect student, he wanted nothing to do with academia ever again, a character trait that drives this manhwa. Unfortunately, while reminiscing about his graduation day, Leon didn't realize he was standing in the middle of the road. In the next moment, an out-of-control van ran him over, ending his life while he was still wearing his graduation gown. Although his degree and certificate became useless, the determination of Leon to stay away from schools followed him into his next life, setting up the main conflict of the manhwa. Leon finds himself in the body of a young boy with clear memories of his past life, realizing he is the third son of the Warden family, the main mage clan of the Empire. He takes a moment to confirm he isn't imagining things. In those first moments, Leon believes this new life is a reward for enduring the trials of being a graduate student. But this manhwa quickly shows him the harsh reality. Leon discovers that only the firstborn of each Warden generation inherits the family's wealth and power, while the younger sons like him must forge their own path to survive. A few years later, Leon learns swordsmanship and trains under the tutelage of his trustworthy guard, Ara. During one session, Ara asks him why he is learning to use a sword. The young Leon replies that it might be useful in the future. Since the family allows him to follow any path he desires, Leon avoids being reprimanded. Ara, curious, asks if he wants to become a swordsman. Leon calmly explains that he plans to be a mage, as it is the safest path. Ara is surprised by this pragmatic answer and, overwhelmed with emotion, hugs Leon. He feels impressed by the boy's realistic ambition, finding it refreshing compared to the illusory goals of most noble children. Leon, however, considers it normal, a thought shaped by the lessons from his previous life. Furthermore, becoming a powerful mage would make him more acceptable to both the imperial family and the knights. As Leon grows up, the time comes to attend Enrogar to hone his magical skills, a pivotal moment in this manhwa. In the present, Leon snaps out of his flashback and resolves to endure just a few years at the Magic Academy. Ara reassures him that he will do well, but Leon reminds him how in the past, he tried to stop him from learning magic because it was dangerous. Ara responds awkwardly, not knowing what to say. At the academy gates, Carla bids Leon farewell and departs. Moments later, Leon notices the arrival of the Duke's daughter and the prince's carriage. The guards push everyone aside to clear the way, and Leon is surprised by the extravagant measures, deeming them unnecessary for just a few nobles. As Leon reflects on the spectacle, a spoiled noble begins to panic when Leon asks him what is wrong. The spoiled brat complains that he cannot sleep without his servant, and compares the academy's rules about servants to losing his limbs. Recognizing the spoiled child as a pampered fool, Leon decides to play along and watches as the noble approaches a mage, complaining about the school's equality policies, swearing by his family that he will report this injustice. The boy suddenly falls victim to mind magic, the mage turning him into a fool without hesitation, surprising Leon, who realizes that the rumors about the academy might be true in this manhwa. Leon recalls hearing that students who die at the academy are secretly buried in the mountains to keep the school's secrets hidden, a dark twist typical of this manhwa genre. As he processes this, the entrance gates open and a deep, authoritative voice resonates, calling the newcomers fools and warning them that everything at Enrogar is an illusion. Leanne feels an immense magical pressure and recognizes the speaker as the much-rumored headmaster of the school. Frozen by the headmaster's aura, the students listen, a tense moment in the manhwa, as he mocks those who ignored the rules and brought extra belongings or servants. Without hesitation, the headmaster creates a portal that sucks in all forbidden items and people, then orders the students to enter the main building for enrollment. As the day progresses, the headmaster's identity is revealed, who turns out to be an undead. Now, as his manhwa journey in Enrogar begins, Leon feels uncertain about what to expect, knowing the future holds ominous challenges. Inside the school's main building, someone calls out, asking Lean if he's really from the Warden family. Without answering, Lean turns to see the beautiful Joner Mac, from the renowned Mac family of mages, who introduces herself after exchanging some pleasantries. Lean asks what she wants. She explains that the prince wishes to see him. The prince, Lean wonders, looking at the foolish blonde, smiling shyly at him, knowing the prince's reputation for building a fierce network of contacts on the first day. Lean finds it hard to take this prince seriously. Besides, he's heard the emperor fathered over 100 children, and in this kind of manhwa, if this guy isn't the firstborn, his situation is no better than Lean's. Given that the emperor has refused to support his younger children, Lean thinks the prince might be even worse off than him. After all, everyone here comes from prominent families, which makes the royal family's position weaker in comparison. Joner pulls him out of his thoughts, asking whether he's going with them or not. Before leaving, Lean overhears two students mocking him and Joner for babysitting an unknown prince. Thinking it's better to make friends than enemies, Lean shakes Joner's hand and agrees to follow her to the prince. She mentions how many times she was rejected by others at first, which resonates with Lean. Soon, they meet the 97th prince of the empire named Gando, or rather, the self-proclaimed 97th prince, who is actually the 101st. During their initial conversation, Lean gets distracted, only to snap back to attention when Gando asks if he's listening. Lean focuses again only to hear Gando complaining about another student who rejected his offer earlier. Despite finding Gando childish, Lean humors him, feeding his ego like a true manhwa strategist. However, Gando's responses confirm just how immature and insecure he is. To make matters worse, Gando gets jealous of another student talking to Arden, the 44th princess of the imperial family, who is quite unlike Gando. Arden radiates an elegance and grace befitting royalty, making it natural for others to be drawn to her. Gando asks Lean to confront the student on his behalf, but Lean advises him to behave like a true noble and avoid intimidating people. Gando argues that he's not a bully, and asks Lean what suggestion he has. Lean offers two options, a classic manhwa dilemma: forgive them or challenge them to a duel. Realizing how extreme a duel would be, Gando decides to forgive his half-sister Arden for doing nothing. Later, Joner finds Lean patting Gando's head and compliments him for enduring the prince's nonsense, something she admits even she couldn't handle. Curious, Lean asks why she keeps looking after Gando despite being just a relative. Before she can answer, Headmaster Lich appears out of nowhere, demanding everyone's attention. Lean observes the headmaster and speculates about what he might have lost to become an undead, a fascinating backstory for any manhwa character. The headmaster begins by asking the first-year students why they think they are called Ironheads. Arden guesses it's because their symbol is steel, which provokes a sarcastic taunt and fake dorm points from the headmaster. When she asks if there's a point system, Lich admits there isn't and warns the students to learn to see through lies. The headmaster reveals that the student's symbol, freshman symbol, is actually iron, and begins a speech about the qualities of steel and its usefulness, after catching them in another lie. He lets out a laugh before delivering the real insult. Their symbol is steel because their brains are empty. The mockery leaves Lean stunned, who notices that the director's overwhelming magical power is preventing anyone from talking back. To his surprise, Lean manages to move his arm despite the dense magical pressure, a feat worthy of a manhwa protagonist. This realization encourages him to adapt to the environment. Noticing Lean's movement, the director is surprised, but doesn't comment on it. For his final prank, the director opens a large door revealing a grand dining hall filled with food. He invites the students to feast and recover from their journey. Without hesitation, the spoiled children rush to take their seats, eager to devour the succulent spread of cheese, butter, fried chicken, and grilled fish. But just as they are about to eat, the food vanishes and the director reappears, mocking them for not having paid attention. At that moment, Lean realizes that the director must have lost a significant part of himself to become such a cruel and twisted creature. The director declares that Enrogar's main goal is to produce great mages, fostering one driving force, desire. He distributes a uniform, a loaf of commoner's bread, and one rice ball to each student. The meager rations cause Gando to complain, calling it excessive. The sarcastic director encourages his attitude and reminds the students that if they want better food, clothes, or equipment, they will have to obtain it through magic. The academy's rule is simple. They must fend for themselves. Shortly after, one of the students considers contacting someone outside the academy to smuggle in supplies for him. Unfortunately for him, the undead director overhears him whispering his plan to a friend and encourages him to follow through with such a foolish attitude. After this, the director informs the freshmen that they are forbidden from leaving the school grounds and that they are also not allowed to ask for help from upperclassmen. With that, the director concludes his matriculation speech and wishes the freshmen the best. After the director leaves, Lean reflects on how all schools seem to have eccentric teachers, a classic manhwa trope. Even in his previous life, the professor from the lab next door, during his graduate studies, had the same crazy look in his eyes as the director, the eyes of madness. Just then, Gando appears, complaining to Lean about the unfair treatment they are receiving at the academy. Based on the amount of the prince's manhwa-level whining, Lean concludes that the undead director is even better than the professor he knew. At least here they've been provided with food, lodging, and clothes, which is more than he could say for his old school. At this point, the spoiled prince, a classic manhwa archetype, throws a tantrum at Lean for not taking his complaints seriously. Due to the Warden family focusing on magical research rather than social status, little is known about them, even in noble circles, which leads to many misunderstandings. Gando, believing Lean must have lived in poverty, points out that his servants eat better than the food the school provides and offers to help him out. Gando invites Lean to his home sometime, to which Lean, not knowing what to say, thanks him. Moving on, Lean suggests they go to their dorms to secure a room before it's too late. Even at Enrogar, accept students based on their talent regardless of status, they still divide the dorms into 4 sections to avoid disputes among the spoiled kids. The first dorm, the glorious Blue Dragon Tower, is for those with noble dragon's blood, mainly the royal family and high reputation nobles like Lean. The second dorm, the Eternal Phoenix Tower, houses those who have given everything for the divine flame, disciples from various religious orders. The third dorm, the lightning-biting White Tiger Tower, is reserved for the bloodline of knightly families who are willing to walk the path of both a knight and a mage. Finally, the omniscient Black Turtle Tower is for those with infinite patience. Peasants, servants, slaves, jesters, vagrants, merchants, and newly elevated low-ranking nobles are placed here. Members of the last dorm generally have a lower status and are often looked down upon, which can leave them with low morale. However, Lean sees them as great business partners for his future empire. The arrogant expression on his face as he watches the commoners makes them feel uneasy about his intentions. In Lean's mind, he knows that befriending these commoners is essential for gaining real business experience, a strategic move worthy of a manhwa protagonist. During his internal monologue, a spoiled kid breaks the silence, questioning why it was necessary to admit indecent people like the commoners. This provokes the commoners to glare at him with disdain, but the brainless fool challenges them to confront him, and wonders if he said something wrong. Lean, unwilling to let this no-future fool insult his potential business partners, intervenes as a noble of higher status, calling the boy a fool, declaring that he is the indecent one for clinging to his pride, while everyone else has left everything behind. Upon entering the school, Lean's retort earns him the admiration of those around him, a scene straight out of a school-life manhwa, with many praising him for pointing out the obvious. With the atmosphere now set, Lean prepares to introduce himself to his new companions. Unfortunately, when the commoners learn he is from the Warden family, they immediately become fearful, warning each other not to look him in the eye. The rumors about the Warden family, descended from ancient spirits with a dragon patriarch, terrify them. Confused by their reactions, Lean struggles to understand what is happening, which is a classic manhwa trope. Just then, John approaches, praising him for being a good noble. Lean asks John if he seems scary to her, and she assures him he doesn't, but remarks that he has the dignified aura of a noble. Unbeknownst to Lean, he has no idea how infamous his family is, and before he can think more on it, Gando calls out to him and says to John, complaining that his new bodyguards left him, a prince, all alone. As they return to the prince's side, Lean asks John why she looks after the fool Gando. To answer his question, John explains she does it all for Gando's mother, telling him her story with her. In a flashback, it's revealed that a younger, more stubborn, Yoner met Gando's mother at a royal banquet after accidentally spilling juice on her dress. Expecting to be punished, everyone was surprised when the woman showed mercy and even asked if Yoner was okay. Gando's mother, being incredibly wealthy, gave John a stipend just for being friends with her son. Lean quickly deduces that if that's the case, he should also befriend Gando to win his mother's favor. When they arrive at their dormitory, Lean is surprised by its enormous size. Despite being a school, it has a lake, a forest, and everything they need to fend for themselves. While admiring the scenery, Lean notices some students talking about being lost, so he asks Yoner for clarification. Yoner admits that she's also unsure, as this was supposed to be the way to their dorm. As Lean tries to figure out what's going on, something suddenly appears in front of them, leaving Lean completely terrified like a character in a horror manhwa. After further investigation, it's revealed that a small, unimpressive building suddenly appeared before the noble students, leaving most of them horrified by its size. Gando, the self-proclaimed supervisor of the spoiled kids, remarks that the building is smaller than his servants' quarters and wonders if they're really expected to live like this for the next few years. Ignoring the fool, Lean realizes it will be a challenge to accommodate all these people, a classic setup in this kind of manhwa. However, as he enters the building with Yoner and Gando, the magical pressure inside the place shifts, and within moments, everyone around them disappears. For a while, Lean struggles to adapt to his new surroundings, trying to understand what just happened. Suddenly, a voice greets him, addressing him as a young mage and asking where he would like to go. Lean quickly deduces that the dormitory is, in fact, a magic tower. Shortly after, the voice praises Lean for adapting quickly and informs him that for now he can only access his room and the first year's common lounge. Lean asks if he'll be able to visit other areas later, to which the voice replies that it's possible, but only by learning the names of those places and meeting certain conditions. For now, however, it is forbidden by the headmaster. Frustrated by another restriction imposed by the headmaster, Lean orders the voice system to take him to his room and the system complies. After settling into his room, Lean picks up a book titled about Enar, a key part of the world building in this manhwa, and soon understands why it's the only mandatory subject in the entire school. According to the rules, every first-year student must attend all classes for 1 month before they can choose their subjects. As he flips through the pages, Lean notices a motivational quote from the headmaster, later identified as Oshugo Nadaltes, and concludes that the man isn't as strict as he first seemed. In fact, he finds Enar much easier than the grueling experience of his previous life in grad school. Besides, the room provides him with everything he needs, a classic perk for a manhwa protagonist, so he doesn't have much to complain about. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Lean, the other students are going through an existential crisis due to how sparse and strange their dorm rooms look, a stark contrast often seen in manhwa. Now that he's familiarized himself with the rules, Lean decides to visit the common lounge to find out what classes the other students plan to register for. Upon arriving, he sits with Yoner and asks her what classes she's interested in. Yoner enthusiastically shares her desire to learn alchemy so she can open a workshop after school and supply products to the Imperial Palace. Impressed, Lean praises her ambition, and Yoner asks if he wants to join her. Not wanting to discourage her, Lean carefully explains that running an alchemy business isn't easy and that he'll have to think about it. In the Empire, such a venture requires ruthless tactics to succeed, hinting at the darker themes of this manhwa, and Leanne has no intention of making his life harder. Instead, he decides to focus on more stable subjects. Curious, she asks him what subjects he's interested in. He carefully considers his answer. His main goal is to take subjects with less competition and easier grading, intending to become a civil servant for the Imperial Palace in the future. A very practical goal for a manhwa protagonist. However, saying something so mundane to someone as passionate as Yoner might discourage her. So, to avoid that, Leon tells her he plans to take all the classes for 1 month before deciding, so as not to make a hasty decision. Just then, Gando rushes towards them with a fearful expression on his face, shouting for their help because he thinks someone has broken into his empty room. Hearing his baseless cries, Yoner and Leanne ignore the fool and continue their conversation. The next day, Leanne and his classmates attend their first class on the fundamentals of magic. The subject is mandatory for first years and classes are held separately for each dorm. On the way to the classroom, Leanne notices the other students look dejected and asks Yoner what's wrong. Yoner explains that most of them are hungry and can't sleep properly because their beds are uncomfortable. A common struggle in this kind of academy manhwa. Surprised, Leanne wonders if their situation is really that bad. He recalls a particular time from grad school when his friend offered him a protein bar as his only food for the day. Back then, his schedule had no breaks, and eating protein bars was the usual. On one occasion, his friend promised that the professors would treat them to a feast once the schedule was over. Leanne joked that he'd kill him if it turned out to be ramen. Of course, when the time came, it was the same old story: instant noodles and triangle kimbap. If he managed to survive that, this situation would be a piece of cake. Finally, the students arrive at the classroom for their first class, relieved that the room is on the first floor. However, their relief quickly turns to shock when they open the door and find a troll dressed in neat clothes standing at the podium. Trolls are known for being ferocious and tyrannical monsters, so seeing one in a classroom is a surprising twist. It is beyond their expectations. Without hesitation, the troll greets them and asks them to take their seats. Once the students are seated, the troll introduces herself as Garcia Kim, a half-human troll, and assures them that while she understands their fear, they have nothing to worry about, as she doesn't eat people unless she's very hungry. Although Garcia is clearly joking, the students believe her for a moment. Eventually, she regrets making the joke and starts her class. Before beginning the lesson, she explains that most of the skills they will learn in her class won't be practical until they become adults, as magic is inherently dangerous. However, as budding mages who bear the nickname of Steel, their lessons will introduce them to the fundamentals of magic and help them identify the element that best suits each of them on their journey, a classic power system in the world of Manhwa. Garcia promises to be their compass and urges them to start with the basics. Her first question to the class is, "What is magic?" Almost immediately, Arden stands up and answers confidently. Satisfied with her answer, Garcia praises her and expands on the explanation, saying that magic is the act of borrowing magical power and mana from the origins that shape the world. Everyone admitted to the school should have the ability to sense magical power and recognize it, a foundational concept for any magic-based manhwa. More importantly, using magic requires more than just awareness. It demands the precise combination of magical power and mana to achieve the desired results. Garcia continues to explain that although magic often relies on incantations or specific movements, the core of magic lies in a person's will. Realizing she has been talking for too long, Garcia cuts her explanation short and asks them to stand so they can try magic for themselves. She instructs them to take out their staffs and focus on gathering their magical power while following her instructions. She advises them to maintain control over their magical power while imagining an image of light. For Loner, controlling her magical power proves particularly challenging, a struggle often depicted in a fantasy manhwa, as if she were trying to tame a wild horse that could throw her off at any moment. As the students concentrate, Garcia tells them to complete the spell by shouting a short incantation, "Light." She assures them that using short incantations helps them maintain focus. Lean, who has been paying close attention, carefully goes over the steps to cast and attempts the spell. Predictably, he isn't successful on his first try, but he manages to create a faint, unstable light on his wand. Soon, the other students follow suit, with Joner, Ardeen, and even Gando successfully producing light. In a classic manhwa moment, however, Jun's magic quickly spirals out of control, forcing Garcia to intervene to prevent him from getting hurt. Following the incident, Garcia sternly warns the class to focus on controlling their magical power, emphasizing that failing to do so could have severe consequences. She assures them it's her job to prevent such accidents and encourages them to keep practicing as long as they have magical power. After the second attempt, many of the noble students begin to complain, and about 1/3 of the class gives up completely. Garcia knows that creating light is the most basic spell, but even so, mastering it requires at least a month of practice. For now, the students will have to discover this reality for themselves, as she can't explicitly say so without discouraging them. She encourages them to try the spell one more time. At the end of this round, half of the class is exhausted and gives up. The cycle repeats with more students, dropping out each time, until the 6th attempt, when only one student remains standing like the protagonist of a manhwa. Lean. Before attempting the spell for the 7th time, Lean signals to Garcia, apologizes for interrupting, and asks if he can continue practicing, since he is the only one still trying. Garcia is stunned, wondering how he has managed to last for 7 attempts, since even if he had abundant magical power, most students would have already exhausted their mana reserves by the 5th attempt. Garcia takes a moment to explain that magical power, known by different names among various tribes, is the primary energy source for mages. Since magical power is consumed with each spell, young, inexperienced mages usually exhaust themselves quickly. The fact that Lean is still standing after 7 attempts is a feat straight out of a power fantasy manhwa, and is extraordinary, and something she needs to investigate. She asks him for his name, and Lean gives it while omitting his surname, Warden, which impresses her. Garcia invites Lean to the podium and asks him to give her his hand. When he complies, Garcia assesses his mana reserves and is overwhelmed by what she senses, a vast ocean of mana that makes her feel as if she's drowning, a power level you'd only expect to see in a manhwa. Noticing the alarmed expression on her face, Lean asks if something is wrong. Garcia quickly regains her composure, denying that there is any problem, and asks him to visit her after school. Lihan nods and returns to his seat. Resuming the lesson, Garcia reassures the class not to be discouraged by the rapid depletion of their mana. With practice, they will learn to reduce their mana consumption and naturally increase their reserves. However, she warns them not to over-practice, as it could lead to injuries. As she wraps up, Garcia reminds them not to take her jokes about eating students too seriously, and concludes her first lesson. Later that day, Lihan visits Garcia's office to find out why she wanted to see him. Garcia explains that she has already heard about him from the headmaster. That's right, the eccentric undead had already gossiped to her about him. Still, Garcia reassures Lihan not to worry, because although the headmaster may seem crazy to the average person, he has a good heart. Another little-known fact about the headmaster is his keen eye for spotting talent. He always notifies the professors about new students throughout the years. His comments on the first-year students have been limited to 1 or 2 average remarks about the troublemakers and prospects, but this year his focus is entirely on Lihan. According to him, Lihan possesses a great thirst for a term, used in the East to describe someone with immense wisdom. So, despite the seemingly insulting phrasing, the headmaster likely means Lihan has the potential to achieve greatness in the world of magic, like a protagonist from a popular manhwa. Having experienced Lihan's immense mana firsthand, Garcia is curious about what kind of student and he will become and feels she can expect great things from him, a classic setup in many a manhwa. After giving him a moment to finish her train of thought, Lihan brings her attention back to the present, waiting to answer her previous question. Knowing she can't divulge everything the headmaster told her, Garcia tells him she wanted to meet with him because of his exceptional mana reserves. Although Lihan already knows this, he feels disappointed, suspecting there must be something more. Just then, Garcia continues, explaining that his mana is so vast and that she can't even estimate its limits. Lihan stands there, stunned. Garcia clarifies that the amount of mana one possesses is a form of talent, a common theme in this kind of manhwa. Mages with insufficient mana often face great difficulties in increasing their reserves, while those with abundant mana have the luxury of being more carefree. Realizing the extent of his talent, Lihan gets excited, thinking his path will be much easier, just like in a power fantasy manhwa. However, Garcia calls his strength unfortunate. When Lihan asks what she means, she explains that having too much mana can be problematic. Although a large mana reserve is advantageous for a mage, an excess makes control extremely difficult, a challenging twist for any manhwa hero. To illustrate, she compares controlling the water in a glass to controlling the water in the sea. The latter is far more challenging. Simply put, mana control, the most critical skill for a mage, will be extraordinarily difficult for Lihan to master, a significant hurdle in his manhwa journey. Hearing this, Lihan sinks into despair, and as the reality of his situation hits him. Fortunately, Garcia has a temporary solution. She pulls out a special bracelet, a classic artifact you might see in a fantasy manhwa, places it on Lihan's right wrist, and instructs him to always wear it. The bracelet will absorb his excess mana, keeping it under control for now. Relieved, Lihan thanks Garcia for diagnosing and addressing his problem. Just as he is about to leave, Garcia advises him to use a variety of magic spells to deplete his vast mana reserves, which will help keep them in check. She suggests he practice alone, since his mana won't be completely depleted, and encourages him to do it with energy. Lihan laughs nervously, thanks his professor, and heads into the hallway to meet his friends, while reflecting on his suddenly challenging future. Determined to excel in his first year, a common goal in this kind of manhwa, he asks his friends about the classes they plan to take after the first month. Yona replies that she will stick with alchemy, and asks if the others want to join. The spoiled prince scoffs at Yoner for choosing a subject he considers suitable for servants, after making some derogatory comments about alchemy. Yoner, now visibly angry in a way that's classic for a manhwa heroine, clenches her fist and tells Lihan to step aside. Recognizing her rising temper, Lihan complies, letting her vent her frustration on the prince. Before Gando can react, Yoner hits him hard and forbids him from going to the infirmary for potions created by alchemists to heal his wounds. After witnessing Yoner's retaliation, Lihan longs for her punch and follows her to their first basic alchemy class. On the way, Lihan asks if it's okay to hit Gando. Yoner assures him it will be fine if she apologizes the next day. Lihan realizes she has done this before, but soon notices that many students are gathering for the class, especially those from the Black Tortoise Tower, a detail that adds depth to the manhwa's world. Although he doesn't care much about them, their stares bother him. He observes that commoners usually react to nobles in one of 2 ways: fear or hostility. For now, Lihan decides to remain calm, knowing that being too friendly could backfire, a cautious approach often seen in manhwa protagonists. When they arrive at the class location, the professor does a student count, expecting another eccentric professor, but the students are surprised to see that their teacher is just a normal-looking dwarf who introduces himself as Uragangamar. He asks the class why they are having the lesson outdoors, without any desks, as expected. Arden, the professor's pet, raises her hand and answers confidently that it's to feel the mana of nature, as alchemists need to understand its power. However, Urugam tells her she is wrong, and then overhears Lian and Yoner discussing the question. When Yoner asks Lian for his opinion, he casually suggests that it's probably because the location is good for gathering materials. Urugam praises Lian for giving the correct answer, calling him a student who uses his brain. Arden, the classic Manhwa rival annoyed by the main character's success, looks visibly irritated. Lian pleads with the professor not to set him up as a rival. Moving on, Urugam gathers the students and explains what is truly needed for alchemy. While many assume that alchemy requires exceptional talent or intricate control of mana, in reality, the most important skill in this manhwa's take on alchemy is the ability to gather materials. Arden challenges the professor's last statement, questioning why learning to gather materials is so important when materials can be cultivated or commissioned. As murmurs of agreement with her point spread through the group, Professor Uragan becomes visibly angry and calls her a blockhead for not understanding practical realities. In his experience, only about 10% of cultivated or purchased materials are viable. They are often unreliable due to the way adventurers handle them. Many of these so-called adventurers just rip the medicinal herbs out, so roughly that it would anger the gods. In essence, Uragan emphasizes that alchemists must know how to gather their own materials, a common lesson in many a manhwa, as failing to do so will lead to failure. After concluding his explanation, Uragan distributes scrolls with illustrations of a rare mushroom-like herb. He orders the students to find the specific material and not to return empty-handed. Left to their own devices, the students begin to discuss their next steps. Strange rumors surround Lian, so when he and Yoner identify the herb as doko weed, a common ingredient in antidotes, Yoner mentions that he had used it before entering the academy. Among the many rumors about the school, there's one that says students frequently die while learning magic, a dark trope often seen in this kind of manhwa. Looking at the forest before them, Lian wonders why the school is so careless as to send first-year students into such a dangerous area. The forest seems particularly perilous for just him and Yoner to traverse alone. After much deliberation, they decide to find someone from their tower to join them. Initially, Lian considers asking the princess, but Yoner questions if he sees her as approachable. Lian dismisses this, reasoning that familiarity isn't necessary, since they're just looking for a medicinal herb. Yoner points out that it's already too late, as it seems everyone has already paired up with the princess. Lian feels jealous, noticing that even students from the Black Turtle Tower are avoiding him. Yoner reassures him, explaining that the princess was already famous before enrolling. Her intelligence and talent made her a celebrated figure, admired by people of all statuses. Naturally, she attracts many followers. Meanwhile, Lian, as expected, is having no luck. As most students form teams and leave, Lian realizes that only students from the Black Turtle Tower are left. Despite the animosity towards him, he focuses on finding someone who can complement his weaknesses, a classic manhwa team-up strategy. Spotting a dark elf with short hair, muscular legs, and calloused hands, he decides she's the perfect candidate. The girl, named Nilia, comes from the Black Turtle Tower and belongs to the Northern Empire's Shadow Patrol, a group of elite hunters and scouts who navigate the region's mountains with remarkable agility. Seeing the illustration of the herb on the scroll, Nilia initially doesn't think finding it will be difficult. Although she's unfamiliar with the herb, she considers the forest her playground. Although she was initially overwhelmed by the many talented individuals at the academy, she now feels this is her chance to shine. As she prepares to leave, Lian's group approaches and introduces themselves. Wary, Nilia demands they state their intentions. Lian invites her to join, but Nilia immediately becomes defensive, suspecting they might exploit or abandon her, a common fear in the harsh world of this manhwa. Lian reassures her, pointing out the dangers of traveling alone. She asks him how he plans to handle an encounter with a monster or carry the herb if he finds it. Nidia remains skeptical, but becomes increasingly intrigued as Lian accurately guesses her thoughts. After a series of exchanges, Lian provokes her, suggesting that only a fool would try to complete the task alone. Eventually, Nidia gives in and agrees to join them. Grateful for her decision, Lian encourages the group to start moving. As they traverse the forest, Nidia leaps from tree to tree with the grace of a wild animal, a sight straight out of an action manhwa, while Lian and Joner walk below, impressed by her agility. Joner asks Lian how he knew she was the right choice. He explains that her developed leg muscles, calloused palms, and the likely use of a bow and arrow are clear signs of an experienced hunter. Overhearing their conversation, Nydia grows suspicious, sensing an unusual ability in Leanne to read people's thoughts, a power often depicted in fantasy manhwa. Leanne, noticing her reaction, jokingly tells Johnner that he simply recognized the emblem of the Shadow Patrol on Nydia's waist. Continuing their journey, Leanne teases her lightly, until Johnner asks him to match her pace. Nydia asks why, and Leanne explains that since Johnner is the only one who can identify the herb, they can't risk him getting overworked. Curious about Leanne's role in the group, Nydia asks what he contributes if Johnner finds the herb and she acts as the guide. Knowing the truth would upset her, Leanne claims his job is to protect them. Examining Leanne more closely, Nydia deduces he comes from a family of knights. She asks him why he's at the Blue Tower, and Leon replies that he belongs to the Warden family, a shocking reveal worthy of a dramatic manhwa. Hearing this, Nydia is so startled, she nearly falls from the tree she's perched on. Noticing the terrified look on her face, Leon asks Johnner if there's something strange about his family. Johnner reassures him, explaining that it's normal for famous noble families to be surrounded by crazy rumors. However, the Warden family is particularly infamous. Some believe the Warden Patriarch is a dragon, a tale worthy of a manhwa, who burned hordes of undead with his breath during the Undead Frenzy incident. Others claim the Wardens have made contracts with ancient spirits to gain their unparalleled magical talent, a plot point common in many a manhwa, and losing their emotions in the process. There's even a story of a Warden mage destroying an entire city during a riot. Hearing Johnner's explanation, Leanne realizes that the world sees his family as monsters who leave destruction in their wake. But is it so bad for great mages to intervene during major incidents? Johnner reassures him, explaining that those rumors don't matter and advises him not to dwell on them. Meanwhile, Nydia notices the pain on Leanne's face and concludes that he isn't as indifferent as the rumors suggest. Tired of the gloomy atmosphere, she urges them to keep moving. After walking a few more miles, Nydia spots something unusual and stops the group to investigate. They discover enormous monster tracks, the kind that promises an epic battle in any good manhwa, and, judging by the shallow impressions, the creature tried to avoid leaving a trail. Nydia's scout instincts are thrilled by this classic manhwa setup, admiring how well trained the monster must be. Johnner, however, feigns interest and Nydia quickly notices, apologizing for talking too much. Nydia tells Johnner it's okay if he's not interested in what she's observing. Surprisingly, Lean shows genuine curiosity and asks Nydia for more details, leaving her bewildered. Nydia asks if he's serious. Lean assures her there's nothing strange about his interest, and Nydia comments that someone from a prestigious family like his shouldn't admire such rudimentary arts, but she warns him to stay alert. She explains that not only is the creature large, but it's impossible to predict what else might be lurking nearby. The monsters rumored to roam the academy grounds, much like in a fantasy manhwa, including experiments and slimes, make the forest particularly dangerous. Johnner agrees, observing that Nydia's abundant mana makes her a magnet for monsters. Nydia suggests they change their strategy and follow the monster's tracks to reduce the chances of an ambush. Intrigued, Lean asks if he can learn to track creatures himself. Nydia warns him it won't be easy, but she relents when Lean sincerely asks her to teach him. Letting her guard down, she agrees to be his mentor in the ways of the hunter after several more miles. The group finally finds the dew herb. Johnner identifies it immediately, but there are only 2 herbs, one less than the 3 they need to pass the test. With no more herbs in sight, Johnner instructs the group to move to another location. Before they can act, they fall silent as Johnner turns around and sees a huge monstrous boar nearby, a classic manhwa cliffhanger. Lean observes that it's no ordinary boar, given its ability to detect mana. Nydia confirms his suspicion, it's a monster. Recognizing the danger, Lean makes a bold decision, just like a true manhwa protagonist. With no other weapons, he decides to use his magic staff. Fortunately, the user can adjust the staff's size. He extends it into a long weapon, preparing to face the monster. Nydia, impressed by his heritage as a member of the Warden family, gets excited, hoping he has already learned some magic tricks. She asks if he is confident in his abilities. Lean responds with uncertainty, prompting Nydia to offer a contingency plan. If things go wrong, he should carry the weakened Johnner and escape while she distracts the monster. Johnner is touched by Nydia's willingness to protect them, but Nydia dismisses it, saying she's only helping because she can. Lean thanks her for her support and promises to help her if needed. With their plan set, Lean confronts the monstrous boar in a scene worthy of a top-tier action manhwa. Nydia, filled with anticipation, watches closely as Lean grips his staff, recalling his training with Sid Arlong when he was 10 years old. Back then, Arlong taught Lin that although the sword is considered the queen of weapons, a true knight must master multiple weapons to achieve enlightenment. This is a core concept in many a power fantasy manhwa. Only those who go through this process can condense their mana into a weapon and achieve aura mastery. However, Arlong doubted Lin's interest in such pursuits, knowing that only a select few reach this level, a common struggle for any manhwa protagonist. True to form, Lin had told Arlong that he didn't wish to pursue such lofty goals, but merely wanted to train his body for self-defense and live a peaceful life as a mage, unlike the typical overpowered manhwa hero. Moved by Lin's pragmatic attitude, Arlong promised to train him to the best of his ability and added 100 extra repetitions to his stabbing exercises. Recalling that training, Lin clears his mind and focuses completely on defeating the monster boar, thrusting his staff into the boar's mouth with a fluid motion straight out of a manhwa, killing it instantly. Both Nilia and Lionel are stunned by the result, staring at Lin in disbelief, wondering why he didn't use any magic tricks. As sturdy as Inar's staff was, he still shouldn't have been able to defeat a monster of such caliber so easily. Unbeknownst to them, Lin had condensed some of his mana into the staff subconsciously, allowing it to function like a sword, although this was far from Laura's mastery. His quick thinking and determination saved him and the girls, allowing him to live to fight another day. As the monster stops moving, the trio assesses the fatal wound, while Yonet is amazed that Lin managed to kill such a massive creature with just a staff. Nilia is more concerned with how overwhelming the class seems. She can't believe the professors would send new students to such a dangerous area and even considers skipping future classes entirely. When another scream echoes nearby, after reassuring Yonet, the trio runs to investigate the source of the cry. When they arrive, they find a group of students fighting another monster boar. Given the number of students present, Lin suggests they observe for now, and Nilia agrees. Just then, a young nobleman named Asan Darth steps forward, a classic trope in many a manhwa. Armed with his staff, he declares, confidently that he will handle the monster by himself. Yonet immediately recognizes him as a member of the renowned Darth family, known for their exceptional skills in history as the Emperor's financial advisors. Based on this reputation, Lin assumes Asan must be competent and trusts that he knows how to handle a weapon. However, when the fight begins, it becomes clear that Asan's bravado is all talk. His first attack barely scratches the boar, only enraging it further. Realizing his strategy was flawed, Asan tries to recover, but it's too late. The boar kicks him with immense force, sending him flying several feet. With Asan incapacitated, the boar turns its murderous gaze toward the princess and the others. At that moment, the princess steps forward in a scene worthy of a top-tier manhwa. Yonet asks Lin what they should do, but Lin just watches, reading the princess's expression. She seems deep in thought, calculating her attack. Watching closely, Lin notices how the princess waits for the boar to charge, striking only at the perfect moment. Her calculated attack hits its mark, and the boar lets out a cry of pain before collapsing. After the battle, Lin thanks Nilia for teaching him the importance of approaching such creatures from downwind. He assures her he will rely on her advice more in the future. Following the victory, Princess Harden expresses her gratitude to Lin for saving her and her team. Instead of showing jealousy, Lin brushes it off. But Nilia can't help but wonder why they are speaking so formally. Shouldn't students in the same year speak more casually? Nevertheless, Harden insists on rewarding Lin for his help. Curious, she asks what he wants in return. Lin surprises him by asking for a list of classes where it's easy to stand out. Initially, Harden thinks he's testing him, but when Lin repeats the question, he realizes he's serious. Before he can answer, the professor, who had been spying, emerges from his hiding spot, declaring that he knows the answer to Lin's inquiry. Recognizing the professor, Lin gets an ominous feeling that reminds him of his previous life and his intimidating graduate school professor, a memory straight out of a psychological manhwa. Professor Urugum interrupts his thoughts, suggesting that the alchemy class is what Lin is looking for. Calming himself, Lin replies that success in alchemy should be achievable with passion and dedication. Intrigued by Lin's enthusiasm, Urugum promises to help him develop the passion and love he speaks of. However, Lin notices the envious glares from the other noble students who resented the professor's interest in him, a classic manhwa trope. Undeterred, Lin informs Urugum that he still wants to explore other options. Taking the hint, Urugum concludes the class for the day. Unfortunately, other groups weren't so lucky. They didn't find any boars, but their experience was sufficient for the lesson. Just then, Hasten, sporting a black eye, confronts Urugum, accusing him of intentionally sending the students into a dangerous area. Urugum explains that the purpose of the exercise was to expose the students to various scenarios they might face while gathering herbs whether it's to fight, flee, dodge, or hide, as an alchemist must be prepared for all possibilities. Hearing this, Jonar wonders if they still need to turn in the Doko herb, given the danger they face to collect 3 of them. Urugum, surprised that any group managed to find the herb, praises their efforts and rewards the 3 students, giving them a passing grade. He also commands that Lean join his alchemy class. Internally, Lean feels trapped by this development, a common plot point in this kind of manhwa, but he resigns himself to this new reality and tells the professor he'll do his best to take the class, as learning alchemy is his dream. After hearing everything he's said, Urugum begins to see him as a mature person, much more focused than someone his age would normally be. Having slain the monstrous boar and obtained the Doko herb, it was a feat worthy of a manhwa protagonist. Urugum rewards Lean with a special privilege, granting him unrestricted access to his cabin in the woods for the rest of the semester. Initially confused, Lean imagines he'll be overwhelmed with endless chores, but Urugum clarifies that the cabin, he explains, is stocked with what new students desire most: food. Although they might not appreciate it now, Urugum assures them that after a week of eating the school's low-quality meals, they'll be singing his praises. Lean weighs his options and realizes how difficult it would be to survive on the bland food provided by the school, especially since the noble kids have their own tower with better provisions, a common theme in Academy manhwa. With Urugum's cabin filled with fresh ingredients, including spices and vegetables gathered from the forest, Lean concludes that he has essentially been given an all-you-can-eat pass for the entire semester. His frown transforms into a smile as he shakes Urugum's hand, declaring that alchemy is the best. Urugum, amused, replies that he's already starting to grow fond of Lean, feeling they are kindred spirits. However, the cheerful atmosphere doesn't last long, as Urugu releases the wounded boar back into the forest. The noble children complain about the exhausting practical work, vowing never to attend the class again. Meanwhile, Lean suppresses his annoyance with the school, a familiar trope in many a survival manhwa, and focuses on the immediate task, managing the rations, accompanied by Nilia and Jonar. Lean heads to Urugu's cabin. After moving the boar's carcass aside, he wonders if he can skin the animal by himself. Noticing the fear on his face, Jonar offers to help, provided he gets some meat in return. Lean, suspicious of the expression on his face, asks if he'll be okay. Jonar reassures him while Nilia wonders if she'll have to do it herself, noting that nobles usually avoid such tasks. Lean stands up and jokingly asks if she's a vegan or just hates meat. Embarrassed by the question, Nilia decides to prove her worth, showcasing her hunting skills. With Nilia's experience as a hunter and Jonar's family knowledge of handling materials, Lean concludes they can handle the task together. Shortly after, Urugan returns with the necessary equipment and hands it over. Armed with the tools, Lean takes the initiative, skillfully skinning the boar like a seasoned manhwa protagonist. Even Nilia is surprised by his dexterity, assuming he's too noble to handle that kind of work. Once the hide is removed, Lean prepares the lean meat and hangs it on wooden branches. He urges his companions to save the intestines to make sausages later, reasoning that every part of the animal must be preserved, given their uncertain circumstances. While the meat is smoking, Urugan visits and praises Lean's foresight, saying that choosing to smoke the meat as a preservation method shows excellent survival instincts, especially for someone who has only been at the school for 3 days. Urugan marvels at how far Lean has come in such a short time, a rapid development common in manhwa. When the smoking is complete, Lean casually asks the professor for bread and butter, saying he must be hungry. Unable to refuse, Urugan agrees, pulling out the best ingredients from his pantry. It doesn't take long before the outdoor table is laden with delicious food and jams. Everyone helps themselves and savors the meal. Jonar compliments the professor on the jam, noting how it enhances the tender, smoked meat they've prepared. As they enjoy the meal by the stream, Balaam encourages them to eat their fill, reminding them that they won't have access to such high-quality food often. For the first time in days, the trio relaxes, enjoying the company and the professor's presence in a rare, peaceful scene for this action-packed manhwa. Afterward, Lean and Jonar pack the leftover smoked meat into rations and discuss what to do with it. Unable to eat anymore, Nilia suggests sharing it with the other students in their tower. Misunderstanding her intention, Lean and Jonar assume she wants to sell the meat. Nilia clarifies she never said that, but Lean points out that most students in the Blue Dragon Tower are wealthy enough to pay, and it wouldn't hurt to make some money. As Lean and Jonar congratulate each other on their plan, a classic manhwa side hustle, Nilia shakes her head, surprised at how nobles think. A classic, class-based conflict you'd find in the manhwa genre. Unaware of their goals, she asks if they plan to sell the meat. Lean asks if she wants a share of the profits, but Nilia insists she just wants to give it away to her friends. Lean shrugs and tells her to do as she pleases, but warns her she might regret not taking the opportunity. Joner steps in, claiming that friendships may fade, but riches are forever. Exasperated, Nydia tells them to stop, while Uruk, observing in silence, realizes that the trio is talented but troublesome. Despite the headaches he anticipates from them, he decides he's ready for the chaos they'll bring. As Leon and his friend Johnny return to the Blue Dragon Tower, a strange tower usually isolated from the main grounds and surrounded by the fresh scent of the forest, they immediately start roasting some of the meat they brought from Urug's cabin. Their goal is to let the savory aroma fill the entire dormitory and attract potential customers. Approximately 30 minutes after they start, the other nobles begin to smell the familiar aroma of roasted meat. At first, they are confused, as it's a scent they didn't expect to encounter while enduring their struggles, a surprising development in this manhwa, and invites everyone to try his roasted meat. Almost instantly, the students gather around their makeshift restaurant, asking questions about what's going on. Leon reassures them and captures their full attention, announcing that they have prepared everything for everyone. However, before they start eating, he informs them that the food will cost 2 silver coins per person. Despite the price, no one complains. Good food is a luxury they are eager to enjoy again. This whole business venture is a plot you'd read in a money-making manhwa, savoring its tenderness and spices. As Leon and Lloyd watch their customers eat, they tally up their sales and are surprised pleasantly by the number of plates they've sold, even after tripling the price. After all, the students have no other choice. They are too naive to figure out how to get meat for themselves, a common theme in this type of manhwa. In other words, it's a win-win situation. Around that time, Gando finally recovers from Johnny's blow and gets to his feet with his stomach growling loudly, wondering what all the commotion outside is about. It doesn't take long for him to catch the irresistible aroma of roasted meat, so he goes out to investigate. As soon as Leon sees him, he invites him to sit and eat like everyone else. Without hesitation, Gando sits down and prepares to devour the roasted meat, but just as he's about to eat, Leon stops him, reminding him that even as a friend, he has to pay 1 silver coin to keep eating, a classic manhwa protagonist move. Surprised, Gando asks if they are charging, to which Leon replies that a noble's pride would not allow them to eat for free. The problem is, Gando is broke. However, Leon generously offers to let him sign a credit contract, trapping him in a debt scheme worthy of a manhwa. Almost bursts into tears, praising Leon for being such a good guy, and feeling lucky to have made such a good friend. As Gando signs the contract, oblivious to the fine print like many naive manhwa side characters, thinking he's made a great deal, Leon and Johnny remain silent and let him enjoy his meal in peace. With that, the good day comes to an end, and everyone goes to sleep satisfied. The next morning, the students of the Vangloria Tower gather in the same hall for their basic magic and personality education class. Many of the nobles wonder why they must take such a class, a typical arrogant attitude for nobles in any academy manhwa. Lean can barely stand the arrogance of these fools, but he maintains his composure, refusing to get worked up over their nonsense. Suddenly, the headmaster appears out of nowhere, welcoming the students to his class. When they realize that the headmaster is also the personality education teacher, they are filled with fear, being careful not to say anything that might provoke him. The headmaster, noticing how well-fed everyone is, scolds them for taking over 1 month to get food. One of the foolish nobles dares to speak up, asking if the headmaster expected them to get food by themselves. But before he can continue, the headmaster silences him, informing the students that he's relieved their empty heads finally, managed to get some decent food. And internally, the headmaster recalls how the Blue Dragon Tower has always been the slowest to get food, with the Black Tortoise Tower being the fastest and the White Tiger Tower the second fastest. The Blue Dragon Tower, composed mainly of privileged nobles, often struggles with tasks like these, since they've never faced real hardship. However, this year, the headmaster is impressed with how quickly they've adapted. He knows full well that Lean is the genius behind their success and makes eye contact with him, acknowledging his leadership. From the moment he saw Lean during enrollment, he knew he was different, a classic trope in this kind of manhwa. What's even more surprising is that someone as adaptable and carefree as Lean comes from the rigid and stubborn Warden family. To give some context, the headmaster is known for being a teacher who enjoys challenging his students, believing that flexibility and creative thinking are the most important traits a mage can possess. At that moment, the same foolish noble asks the headmaster what the purpose of the class is. Pleased with the question, the headmaster turns the question back on him, asking the student what he thinks the purpose is. As expected, the noble admits he doesn't know. Annoyed, the headmaster explains that the emperor often holds him responsible for the actions of the academy's graduates. Many of his seniors have caused major problems in the empire, and when they do, the headmaster is blamed for their foolishness. Therefore, he uses this class as a safeguard, an excuse to avoid being punished for his students' future misdeeds. He asks if they understand, and then warns them not to deny their imperfections, as mages are an unpredictable bunch. If they claim to be perfect, it will only set him off even more. With that, he orders them to open their books and recite the mantra on page 1 out loud. I will not cause harm to common people with my magic. Lin stands there, stunned, wondering if this class could really fix the corrupt personalities of his fellow nobles. This manhwa has some interesting plot points. Eventually, the headmaster gets tired of the students mumbling and orders them to be quiet, expressing his hope that the class will help them develop kinder personalities, then asks for 2 volunteers to help him. Immediately, everyone avoids his gaze, sensing something suspicious about his request, when the headmaster threatens to make their lives harder if no one steps up. Lin volunteers, hoping there's a worthwhile reward at the end of it. This is a typical move for a clever manhwa protagonist. The headmaster tries to intimidate Lin, but he stands his ground, feigning enthusiasm and claiming he's happy to help a teacher he respects so much. The headmaster easily sees through the lie but doesn't press the issue, knowing Lin is just looking for potential benefits. The dynamic between these two is a highlight of the manhwa. As the professor speaks, Lin realizes the director has already figured out his true motive. Just then, Gando, thinking Lin is making a terrible mistake, calls out to him asking if he understands what the crazy director has planned for them. Before he can continue, another noble interrupts, explaining that Lin is sacrificing himself to protect the others from trouble, a classic trope in this kind of manhwa. Gando decides to intervene for his friend, but unfortunately his cowardly legs refuse to cooperate, and before he can act, someone else volunteers. The director identifies the second volunteer as Asan Darth, a member of a family known for their skill with documents, and immediately makes a sarcastic comment about his name. As Asan responds, Lin remembers him from the incident with the monstrous boar, and wonders if Asan has the same goal in mind as he does. When Asan finishes speaking, he turns to Lin and explains that this is his way of repaying the favor for his earlier help. Lin tries to dissuade him, but Asan boasts about his family's skill in calculations, giving the director the impression that the 2 boys are on good terms. However, the director abruptly interrupts them, assigning them the task of copying all the student safety rules for the next class. Both Lin and Asan are stunned. Later that night, the boys stay after class to get a head start on the assignment. After hours of writing, Asan erupts in anger, his rage boiling over. He swears he'll never forgive the director for this, especially since he knows he could have completed the task in an instant using magic, a common frustration in a fantasy manhwa. Lin watches Asan's outburst in silence, hoping he doesn't collapse from the stress. Reflecting on the situation, Lin suspects the director gave them this tedious task deliberately to encourage them to use magic once they became too frustrated to continue manually. Unfortunately, they lack even basic magic skills like illumination, so using magic to write seems impossible. At that moment, an idea pops into Lin's mind. He reasons that the director, if he has any conscience at all, must have left them a clue somewhere. Asan notices Lin's sudden silence and asks him what he's doing. Lin replies that he's looking for something to help them solve their problem. Asan hesitates, asking if such actions could be considered stealing. Lin argues that since they weren't given any explicit rules, searching for a solution in the director's office shouldn't count as theft. Realizing the logic, Asan agrees, reasoning that occasional thievery is fine if it's necessary. They decide to split up and search the room for clues, a scene straight out of an adventure manhwa. After searching the office without much success, Lin stumbles upon a drawer glowing with a green light. He calls out to Asan, feeling the emanation of mana coming from it. Curious, they open the drawer, only for the director's head to pop out, laughing at their apparent clumsiness. Although Lin doesn't recognize it as illusion magic, he remains wary, expecting more tricks. The director's pre-recorded message plays, mocking them for resorting to this method, and joking that it would be embarrassing if they'd waited too long to think of it. He finally provides them with instructions for using the first circle magic scrolls, specifically basic control, and urging them to learn it as soon as possible. With that, the message ends, leaving the boys to figure out the rest. Furious with the headmaster's teaching methods, Asan throws a tantrum and suggests filing a complaint. Lin, ignoring him, begins to study the papyrus scroll. When Asan presses him further, Lin asks if he thinks complaining to the crazy headmaster will work. Realizing the chances are slim, Asan gives up the idea and reluctantly joins Lin in practicing basic control, a common starting point in many a manhwa. After several failed attempts to lift a single quill with magic, Asan exhausts his mana and collapses, leaving Lin to continue alone. Despite the magic's apparent simplicity, Lean understands its complexity. Mana is delicate and gathers differently for each person. Determined, he concentrates intensely, treating this like a life-or-death situation. After reciting some motivational mantras to himself, Lean tries to move the quill one last time. To his amazement, it moves. The two boys stare in surprise, realizing they have made their first breakthrough, a classic Manhwa power-up moment. Asan is freaked out by Lean's power. Now that the spell works on the quill, Lean's next step is to control its movement. More slowly, he focuses on the quill and tries his spell again. But instead of moving slowly, the quill flies past his face, shatters the window pane, and embeds itself in a peach tree outside. Stunned, the boys look at each other in disbelief before realizing it actually happened. To understand the incident, they consult the papyrus scroll and find they must solve two key challenges to master basic magic control. First, they must complete the spell. Then, they must maintain their concentration to control the object. The text also mentions that completing the spell is the hardest part, while controlling the object is relatively easier. Encouraged by this information, Lean decides to try again. This time, he carefully concentrates on a quill to make sure it doesn't go out of control. Just as he begins, in a move straight out of a manhwa, the headmaster suddenly appears out of nowhere, asking if they've had enough practice yet. Startled by the interruption, Lean loses focus and the quill begins to move uncontrollably around the room, finally hitting the headmaster's forehead. Unfazed, the headmaster asks if they understand why he assigned them this task. Both boys yell that they don't. Asan, strangely impressed by Lean's accidental attack, declares himself a fan of his skills. Before Asan can provoke the headmaster further, Lean interrupts him, pointing out that the quill didn't even graze the headmaster's forehead. Stepping forward, the headmaster, a classic overpowered manhwa character, congratulates Lean on his rapid progress, albeit with a backhanded compliment, calling him a good fake fool. Lean, still stunned by his accident, is surprised the headmaster isn't ranting. He thinks the headmaster must be in a good mood, so he takes the moment to ask for advice on object control. The headmaster responds mockingly, asking how Lean could possibly have trouble with control if he's already completed the spell. When Lehan unapologetically admits his difficulties, the headmaster lies, assuring him that it's normal for new students to face such struggles. Just as Lehan sighs in relief, the headmaster drops the act, telling him it's a lie and pointing out that the spell is the difficult part. In his experience, mastering control should only take 1 or 2 attempts, so anyone who fails at it is a special kind of fool. When Lehan asks for advice, the headmaster simply tells him to figure it out himself. Then, using teleportation magic, he sends them to the cafeteria for lunch. In an instant, Lehan finds himself back in the cafeteria. Annoyed, he grumbles about how the headmaster only uses important spells for trivial purposes, a trope often seen in a fantasy manhwa. Looking around, he notices the cafeteria is empty, as it's well past lunchtime. Resigned, he decides to eat the boring bread and rice balls he's grown accustomed to, but chooses to upgrade his meal with some smoked meat he prepared back at Urugu's cabin. While he's at it, Arden enters the cafeteria and greets him. Surprised, Lehan greets her back and asks what she's doing there. She reveals that she's brought the data he requested earlier, a list of easy subjects. Gratefully, Lehan thanks her and opens the list. However, he soon realizes she has mistakenly given him a list of popular subjects instead of the ones he asked for. He becomes even more alarmed when he sees that understanding alchemy is among them. Getting straight to the point, Lehan informs Arden of her mistake, explaining the difference between popular and unpopular courses. Realizing that Lehan is genuinely interested in studying boring subjects, Arden is disappointed. Initially, she thought Lehan was a noble, but now she sees him as despicable and unworthy of her admiration. A classic manhwa misunderstanding. Reluctantly, she retrieves the correct list of unpopular courses and hands it to him. Looking at the new list, Lehan immediately understands why these subjects are unpopular. The first one, basic swordsmanship, is unappealing because no one at a magic school wants to learn how to sword fight. The second, repeated practice of basic combat magic, is looked down upon because most students are more interested in research than combat. However, none of that matters to Lehan. His goal is to learn skills that will help him protect himself, a common motivation for any manhwa hero. Content with the list, Lehan thanks Arden, who leaves quickly. The next morning, Lehan heads to the first class on his list alone. His friends, Gando, Hassan, and Joner, refuse to join him, and he understands their reluctance regarding the teachers and classes. Lehan knows there's no such thing as consideration. The teachers don't care about their students or their fellow faculty. That's why Lehan opts for a subject he cares little about so he can focus on more important ones. Resigning himself to this mindset, Li-han arrives at the entrance to the school's basement, where his next class is held. Although the staircase leading down looks ordinary, Li-han senses something ominously wrong with the place. Over time, rumors have circulated among the Imperial students about the dangers of entering the magic towers. Though they may look ordinary from the outside, once inside, escape becomes nearly impossible, a terrifying concept in this manhwa. Even as a child, Li-han has read horror stories about people trapped forever in such towers, using them as cautionary tales. One night, when he was young, Li-han asked Arlong if the stories about the magic towers were just fairy tales back then. Arlong admitted that while the stories might be exaggerated, there was some truth to them. Anyone who enters a magic tower is unlikely to come out. In fact, Arlong added grimly, they might die before they even realize it. The once cheerful Lin quickly turned serious, sweating nervously. Lin now sees his school as the ultimate form of a magic tower, which is why most new students, a classic setup in this kind of manhwa, despite their curiosity, avoid exploring the school grounds. However, despite being terrified, Lin musters his courage to head down to the basement, knowing he has a class there. As he braces himself, the eccentric headmaster appears behind him, startling him into a panicked frenzy. After calming down, Lin hides his irritation and greets the headmaster with flattery and a question. He explains that he's heading to the basement, but wonders if the headmaster has any advice. Without hesitation, the headmaster replies that he has nothing to share. To make matters worse, he promises to put flowers on Lin's corpse if it's found the next day. Lin grits his teeth in frustration but forces a fake smile, determined not to give the headmaster the satisfaction of seeing him lose his composure. After parting ways, Lin descends to the first level of the underground facilities. Contrary to his expectations, the hallways look ordinary. As he reaches the classroom entrance, he overhears two students chatting about the class. For a moment, Lin feels relieved that he might not be alone, but the feeling vanishes when one of the students realizes they've made a mistake. The pair quickly realizes they're at the repetitive basic combat magic practice classroom and leaves, muttering insults about anyone foolish enough to take that class, a common trope in many a Magic Academy manhwa. Lin's fleeting hope vanishes, but he gathers his courage, opens the door, and enters the classroom. There are 3 students, each sitting with a blue energy orb on their desk. For a moment, Lin feels cautiously optimistic, but after a quick observation, he realizes that 2 of the students will probably leave soon, a detail that builds suspense in the manhwa, just like the pair he saw earlier. Curious, he examines the blue orb on his desk and wonders what it is. Before he can figure it out, a deep, ominous voice from the podium commands everyone to sit. Startled, Lin looks up, surprised to see a pale man with shadowy eyes and long canine fangs standing there. Concluding that the man must be a vampire, Lin braces himself. The man introduces himself as Vladigreg, the class professor, and with that, the manhwa's first real lesson begins. He explains that the blue orb is made from a material called Spirit Starstone. This mineral is highly sensitive to mana, as constellations emit divine power, and the stones absorb and transform it, a key element of the manhwa's world building. For the demonstration, he required the students to infuse their mana into the orb. Lin hesitates, fearful of his abilities after previously struggling with the Illuminate spell. But to his surprise, he succeeds on his first try. The orb, along with those of the other students, floats into the air, a promising development for our manhwa protagonist. Surprised by how easy it was, Lin begins to suspect that these orbs are not just spiritual starstones. They must be artifacts. Upon examining the markings on the orbs, he concludes they were likely made by Vladigreg himself, a detail worthy of a fantasy manhwa. Lin recalls that well-made artifacts are highly valuable, but before his thoughts can wander any further, chaos erupts. One of the students, a girl with puppy-like ears, loses control of her orb. It zips wildly around the room, alarming the other students who fear it might pierce the ceiling. Greg calmly assures them that the orb is linked to their will and can be controlled. Fortunately, he had the foresight to cast a binding spell on the orbs to prevent them from causing any structural damage. The girl breathes a sigh of relief, until the orb bounces off the ceiling and hits her in the stomach. Greg casually adds that while the spell protects the room, it does not apply to them, so they should be careful not to destroy their orbs. Ignoring the girl's pain, Greg continues the lesson, instructing the students to make their orbs float again. Lin quickly realizes that Greg is a demanding and tough professor when Greg tasks them with drawing a circle with their orbs. Lin's tough trial begins, a classic training arc in any good manhwa, as it is much harder than it looks. As he struggles, one of the male students suddenly succeeds and calls out enthusiastically for Greg's attention. Instead of praising him, Greg coldly tells him to do it again. Exhausted, the students continue to practice until they are fatigued. After 1 hour of frustration, Lean finally asks Greg when they can stop. Initially confused by the question, Greg replies bluntly that they can stop once they have drawn a perfect circle. At this point, two of the male students ask for permission to go to the bathroom. Greg allows it, but they immediately sneak out of class, not to return. Realizing their intention, the puppy-eared girl, who has just recovered enough to stand, begs them to wait for her. However, she soon collapses again, seemingly sick to her stomach. Seeing this, Lean suspects she might be faking it. To make sure, Lean goes to check on the puppy-eared girl and discovers she is not faking, she has actually passed out from mana exhaustion. He immediately informs the professor, who indifferently comments that she will continue making circles once she recovers. At that moment, Lean realizes he is the only one left in the class and resigns himself to his fate. A lonely protagonist moment straight out of a manhwa. While practicing the circle technique, he asks Greg how grades are assigned in his class. Greg explains that regardless of how many students attend, grades are always based on ranking. Hearing this, Lean feels hopeful. This is the class he has been looking for. As long as he keeps practicing to make a perfect circle with the orb, he is confident he will get a good grade. He has always preferred repetitive tasks like this, so he does not anticipate any major problems. On the other hand, Greg is impressed by Lean's decision to stay in the class, especially given the strange rumors that have circulated about him over the years. Greg has grown accustomed to students attending the first class, only to drop the subject afterward. Last year, not a single student stayed, forcing Greg to teach an empty class due to his contract with the headmaster. As a result, the lonely professor spent countless days in the empty classroom, hoping someone would finally attend and give him purpose again. Today, that hope has finally come true, as Lean Warden has shattered Greg's low expectations. Judging by Lean's attitude and actions, Greg can tell he comes from a prestigious noble family, like a protagonist from a popular manhwa, despite his youthful appearance. Lean radiates maturity beyond his years, and although Greg isn't sure what kind of magic he specializes in, Greg knows the young man is extraordinary and would feel honored to have a student like him continue attending his class for the first time in his dead-end career. Greg feels optimistic about moving forward with his lessons. Approximately 1 hour later, the class ends, and Lean leaves the classroom to meet his friends John and Gando in the restroom. He tries to convince them to join the class, emphasizing how easy it is to get good grades. However, before committing, Gando presses him for details about the class. Lean explains that all they need to do is infuse mana into a crystal orb, provided by the professor, and practice drawing circles with it. Suspicious, Gando asks what happens after that, and Lean admits that Greg hasn't explained any further. This raises red flags for both John and Gando, who wonder if Greg might be a fraud, making this whole class feel like a strange manhwa plot. Lean shrugs off their concerns, reasoning that the professor's legitimacy doesn't matter as long as a good grade is guaranteed. Surprised by his pragmatism, John starts to see Lean as someone who doesn't think beyond what's useful. Nevertheless, Lean tells them it's fine if they don't want to join, but mentions he has to leave for his next class. Curious, John and Gando ask him which one it is, and Lean excitedly reveals that it's basic swordsmanship. Both his friends are left dumbfounded. In the next scene, Lean arrives at the south front garden of the main building, wondering if this is really the location for his class. Upon entering the training grounds, he notices there are more students from the White Tiger Tower than he expected. It makes sense, as many of them come from noble families and are skilled in swordsmanship, a classic setup in any academy manhwa. Lean assumes they take the class seriously. As he prepares to enjoy this classic manhwa setting, he overhears rumors about himself. This time, he can clearly hear the students talking. They identify him as a warden from the Blue Dragon Tower and speculate that he only showed up after being trained by his nanny. They accuse him of looking down on swordsmanship and complain about nobles who scorn the profession, which is classic manhwa bully behavior. Initially, Lean expected the knights to be proud of their craft, but after hearing their trivial gossip, he's not so sure anymore, though he doesn't care, since they're just teenagers with underdeveloped brains, a common trope in this kind of manhwa. So he lets it go. Shortly before the class begins, a well-built orc approaches Lian and confirms his identity as the third son of the Warden family. Unfazed, Lian responds with confidence. The orc tells him he's in the wrong place, as this class is for serious swordsmanship practitioners, not beginners. Lian thanks him for the clarification but refuses to leave. This enrages the orc, who warns Lian not to underestimate the class, adding that the students won't hold back during duels, so Lian could get seriously injured. Calmly, Lian thanks him again, but then challenges him to a duel to prove himself, a classic opening for any action manhwa. Furious, the orc looks ready to lose his temper, but before the situation can escalate, the professor arrives and calls the students to gather for the lesson. The professor, an elf, introduces himself as Professor Engel, and announces that he will be teaching the class for the semester. Surprised to see an elf as a swordsmanship instructor, a unique choice in this fantasy manhwa, Lian listens attentively to Engel. He explains that he assumes the students have some experience with swords, and have come either to improve their skills or maintain their current level, so instead of focusing on the basics, he plans to help them refine their personal techniques. As he's speaking, someone from the crowd taps Leon on the shoulder. Turning around, Leon sees another young, blonde elf smiling warmly at him. After confirming that Leon is indeed from the Warden family, the elf asks why someone from such a prestigious family, known for its magic, is learning swordsmanship. Leon calmly explains that it's simply easier to earn points, since fewer people take the class. Although this isn't the answer he was expecting, the elf decides not to press the issue further. For Lian, there's no point in lying to a random person, as it could lead to misunderstandings later, so he feels his honest answer is the best option for this manhwa. After their awkward exchange, the elf introduces himself as Gel from the Mora family and extends his hand. Gel looks young, but Lian notices the calluses on his palms, and quickly realizes this guy must be incredibly strong. Without hesitation, Lian accepts the handshake, and the two get acquainted. For context, the Mora family is known for guarding the harsh northern regions under strict regulations, using any means necessary to achieve their goals. Because of this, Leon expected someone from that family to look rough and unkempt. However, Gel completely defies this stereotype, looking like he walked straight out of a romance manhwa, appearing polished and refined. This surprises Lian, making him reevaluate the rumors about the Mora family. It seems they aren't always accurate, and perhaps he could get along with this handsome blonde guy. As the lesson begins, the professor asks Lian to demonstrate his sword technique, the cliff rock cut he learned from Arlon. True to its name, the cliff rock cut is a solid and straightforward technique, but its training regimen is so rigorous it often discourages nobles. However, Lian endured the arduous training in his youth, the kind of backstory you'd expect from a manhwa hero. After observing the demonstration, the professor praises Lian for having mastered the basics and asks which family he belongs to. Expecting him to mention another family, the professor is visibly surprised when Lian reveals he is from the infamous Warden family. Curious, the professor asks why Lian is studying swordsmanship, and Lian replies that he considers it a necessary skill for the nobility. Unimpressed by the answer, the professor seems disappointed, clearly expecting something more from him. Noticing the look of disapproval from the professor, Lian quickly reconsiders his approach to save the situation. He smoothly adjusts his answer, stating that while his initial belief was practical, he has since come to appreciate the profound nature of swordsmanship. Much like a character in a classic manhwa, he adds that the more he learns, the more he finds himself drawn to the sword, unable to resist attending class. The professor's face lights up with renewed hope, and he even mutters praise for Lian under his breath. Moving on, the professor asks Lian if he is truly determined to pursue swordsmanship and not be held back by his family's expectations. He points out that Lian already demonstrates better technique than some of the students from the White Tiger Tower, who attend only for show. When Lian agrees with confidence, the professor unsheathes his sword and unexpectedly challenges him to a duel, ordering him to raise his sword. Lian is confused by this sudden turn of events, not understanding why he's being treated so harshly, but there's no turning back. He accepts the challenge and soon finds himself facing the professor. As expected in this kind of manhwa plot twist, the duel ends with Lian being completely defeated in just a few minutes. Afterward, the professor congratulates him on his resilience, but reminds him that the cliff rock cut is a technique that, like a rock, should never waver regardless of the opponent. As he helps him to his feet, he advises him to engrave this lesson in his heart and remember it the next time he faces a challenge. With that, the professor dismisses him and calls for the next student. As the professor spars with the next student, Lian adjusts his clothes and silently counts the number of hits he received in the name of training. If nothing else, he realizes the professor has a special skill for exploiting unprotected areas, as he couldn't avoid being hit at any point. Once he calms down, Lian observes just how skilled his professor truly is. Despite having a prosthetic arm and leg, Engel displays a remarkable mastery you'd expect from a grandmaster in a manhwa, as he trains the future knights of the empire with precision and skill. Comparing Engel to his former master Arlong, Lian reflects that while Arlong is like an unyielding rock, Engel flows like water, adapting perfectly to every situation. What stands out most to Lian is the professor's teaching style, a theme often explored in martial arts manhwa. Engel tailors his guidance to each student, offering practical and specific suggestions that address their needs. This thoughtful approach proves he is a true instructor, the kind of mentor every manhwa protagonist needs. As he watches Engel handle the next few students, Lean can't shake the feeling that the professor was especially hard on him. He's not sure why, but he clearly took more hits than anyone else. Approximately 30 minutes later, Engel announces it's time for the day's main event. Without hesitation, he calls Lean Warden and his opponent, Daru of the Choi family, to the arena. Lean recognizes Daru immediately as the orc who tried to pick a fight with him earlier, a classic Manhwa antagonist, awaiting the professor's instructions. Once the stage is set, Engel explains that they will be having a short sparring match. The crowd gasps in anticipation, with some doubting whether it will be a fair fight given the size difference between the two, a classic setup in any action manhwa. Daru, with an arrogant expression, clearly expects an easy victory, ignoring the arrogance of his opponent. Leon focuses all his energy on defeating the green-skinned goon. After all, he has spent his entire life being beaten down and learning swordsmanship for moments just like this. There's no way he'll let some fool steal his chance to shine. The reason Engel chose both of them for the match was simply because they are the most outstanding students in his class, a classic setup in any action manhwa. Besides, swordsmanship can't be learned through theory alone, since it requires intense practice and real combat experience to achieve proficiency. After citing a practical example, it's clearer that both Leon and Daru have met the necessary conditions for a swordsman to unleash their true power. Through a combination of theoretical knowledge and practical application, and even now, Engel can sense that both students are subconsciously infusing a small amount of mana into their weapons, which demonstrates just how impressive their talents as knights are. That said, Engel instructs both students to take their positions. As they do so, he reflects on how unreal it is for someone like Leon, a classic manhwa protagonist who doesn't come from a family of knights, to have reached such a high level of swordsmanship. If anything, he surmises that Leon must have been cast aside by his family, which drove him to take swordsmanship so seriously. Realizing the pain Leon must have endured, Engel becomes emotional and feels proud of what Leon has become. To support Leon's journey, Engel vows to take responsibility for his path with the sword, then begins the duel, eagerly anticipating both students' performances. Daru Choi comes from a family famous for excelling in the film Alpine Moonsword, a fast and sharp style, while Leon uses the Cliff Rock Sword, a heavy and powerful style. Since their approaches are complete opposites, Engel hopes they will both learn from each other's mistakes, which is what rivals are for. As soon as the sparring session begins, Daru grows tired of Leon waiting for him to make the first move. Frustrated, he lunges toward Leon and strikes first with his Alpine Moonsword style. Leon dodges the initial attack and waits for Daru to close the distance. When the moment is right, Leon kicks sand into Daru's eyes, briefly disorienting him. This cunning tactic, a classic move in many a manhwa, causes an uproar among the crowd as students accuse Leon of cheating. However, when one student reports him to the professor, Engel dismisses the accusations and instead praises Leon for thinking outside the box. In his words, he needs his students to do whatever it takes to win, because in battle, there is only life and death. That said, the fight between the orc and the warden prodigy continues. Leon gains the upper hand, especially with Daru still blinded. After taking a shallow cut from Leon's sword, Daru is distressed to realize he let his guard down, just because Leon doesn't come from a highly respected noble family. Meanwhile, Leon notices Daru's disorientation and decides to press his advantage to keep him on the defensive. Having observed Daru's movements, Leon recognized the orc was exceptionally skilled, a worthy rival for any manhwa protagonist. Now he just needs to remain calm and create an opening to secure his victory. Following this plan, Leon stomps on Daru's foot and lands several blows to throw him off balance. Daru is shocked at the lengths Leon is willing to go to win this match at this rate. Daru realizes he needs to step up his game to avoid embarrassment. To regain control, he drops to the ground and performs a barrel roll to escape the reach of Lean's attack. The unexpected move surprises Lean, who realizes he's lost his advantage. Seeing Daru's maneuver, Angel is even more impressed with his skills and praises him, encouraging the fight to continue. Determined to reclaim his pride, Daru lunges at Lean in a fit of rage. However, Lean maintains his composure, responding to Daru's movements, blocking and parrying his attacks when necessary. As the battle intensifies, Angel is overcome with excitement, as both students exceed his expectations. This feels like a classic manhwa showdown. He knew they were exceptional from the start, but to see Daru master the Alpine Moonsword with such skill was extraordinary. However, it's unfortunate that Daru is rapidly losing stamina due to the excessive force he's applying to his technique. Meanwhile, Lean maintains his calm, carefully responding to Daru's attacks, without overexerting himself. Noticing Daru's growing agitation, Lean decides to wait for the perfect moment to exploit it. As the fight continues, Lin observes a strange red aura surrounding Daru and wonders what it could mean. Regardless of its meaning, Lin regains his focus, maintaining a straight face to improve his odds of winning. At the same time, the orc Daru feels that Lin's decision-making is faltering due to the situation. Thanks to his earlier barrel roll, Lin has been forced into unnecessary movements, and it seems his mana-sheath sword is losing effectiveness, suggesting he's close to exhaustion. What Daru doesn't realize is that Lin never tires of using mana. Their sparring session has been a race against time from the very beginning. With this in mind, Daru continues to overexert himself, attacking Lin with all his strength in an attempt to deplete what he assumes is the remainder of Lin's stamina. Over time, however, he becomes confused, as Lin's defense only grows stronger. He wonders if the problem lies in the amount of force he's putting into his strikes. This kind of tactical battle is common in a good manhwa. Observing Lin's calm face again, Daru is suddenly overwhelmed by the feeling that he has been outplayed by the Warden's prodigy. In his mind, it seems as if he's been in the palm of Lin's hand, playing into his trap from the very beginning. This realization unnerves him, and he makes a critical mistake. He pauses to reconsider his strategy. Lin notices Daru's hesitation and seizes the opportunity, striking his hand and disarming him, sending his sword flying. With Daru defenseless, a sweat-covered Lin gently places his wooden sword against Daru's throat, signaling to the referee that he has won the sparring session. To conclude the class, Angel stops the fight and announces Lin as the winner. Shortly after, he calls both students to the front and subtly expresses his disappointment in Daru, who lost his composure at such a critical moment, effectively digging his own grave. However, Angel acknowledges that Daru is still a teenager, and it's somewhat expected for him to struggle with the oppressive feeling of losing. As for Lin, Angel is impressed by the aura of refinement and nobility he exudes, one that befits his skill and demeanor. He has the presence of a true manhwa protagonist. After they both stand before him, Angel congratulates them on their incredible swordsmanship but reminds everyone that winning isn't everything. The victor must remain humble, while the loser must use defeat as motivation to improve. Angel then orders them to bow to each other as a sign of respect. While bowing, Lian senses that Daru might not let things end peacefully, preparing for a potential sneak attack. To his surprise, Daru accepts defeat gracefully and even apologizes for his previous behavior, accepting Lian as a classmate. Leaving Lian amazed to find someone so mature. Initially suspicious of Daru's intentions, Lian observes more closely and concludes that Daru is genuinely accepting his defeat. With this, they both shake hands and reconcile. This display of sportsmanship provokes applause from Engel and the other students, who clap for several minutes until their palms feel sore. Once class is over, Engel dismisses everyone to their dorms. As night falls, Lian finds himself at the center of looming trouble, a classic manhwa trope. The elf he met earlier in Engel's class, Hel Maradi, gathers a group of students from the White Tiger Tower and surrounds Daru. In a quiet corner near their tower's walls, a secluded spot where no one will see them, Hel mocks Daru for the humiliation suffered at the hands of the Warden's prodigy, questioning if he truly intends to accept defeat. Without seeking revenge, Daru maintains that he lost due to his own limitations, but others in the group try to shift the blame to Lian, accusing him of cheating and trying to convince Daru that the defeat wasn't his fault. As the noise increases, Hel interrupts, declaring that none of that matters now. According to him, Daru's failure has dishonored the tower's honor, and the Choi family must be held responsible for this shame. When Daru asks what kind of responsibility he means, Hel reveals his plan. They will look for Lian in the forest when he's alone. Disgusted by the proposal, Daru questions Hel's sense of honor as a noble. Hel dismisses him as a coward, arguing that only winners get to talk about honor. Despite the murmurs of discontent among the other students, no one dares to openly challenge Hel. Firm in his principles, Daru refuses to participate in the plan, declaring that he lost fair and square and will not resort to dirty tactics. He calls him a coward again and asks for another volunteer to replace him. A broad-nosed student steps forward, eagerly offering himself, and Hel accepts him into the plan. As Hel and his group prepare to carry out the ambush, Daru feels increasingly uneasy. Although his pride demands he stay out of it, he can't bring himself to let Lian face such unfair odds. This is a character-defining moment in the manhwa. Alone, determined to do the right thing, Daru runs to find Lian in the forest and warn him about the impending attack. However, when he arrives, he witnesses a shocking scene. A high-speed object flies past him, and he sees several of his tower mates already lying on the ground, defeated. The remaining students, enraged by Lian's strength, hurl insults at him, calling him despicable for daring to defeat them in this manhwa. Meanwhile, Lian remains ready for battle, warning them to come at him if they're ready to die. Nothing makes sense to Daru as he watches the chaos unfold, leaving him stunned. A truly shocking plot twist for this manhwa, and wondering what exactly is happening. A little before Daru's arrival, 3 fools from Muradi's group confronted Lian in his usual spot, vowing to make sure he never attended a fencing class again. The plot of this manhwa is really heating up unshaken. Lin wonders why they are going so far to prove a point, and he quickly concludes that it is not just about the class. Regardless, he finds them annoying and decides to scare them off. With that, he puts on a threatening face and asks them if they really know what family he comes from. The fools, however, refuse to be intimidated by his family name, even calling him a coward for trying to scare them. Judging by their misplaced confidence, Lin suspects there must be some kind of support network or a mastermind pulling the strings. Thinking about the cleanup that would follow a fight, he concludes they must be fools if they think their actions would have no consequences. He then asks them to reveal the mastermind behind the ambush, guessing it might be someone from a powerful family. To avoid ratting out Gel, one of his most die-hard fans tells the others to shut up and not let Lin trick them, then orders the group to surround Lin, blocking his escape route. Although Lin knows a 3-on-1 fight is too much for him, a common setup in a monster manhwa, he remembers Arlan's advice to prioritize his safety and run when necessary. Unfortunately, his escape path is blocked, forcing him to devise another plan. Seeing some stones on the ground, Lin realizes they are the perfect size for casting the basic control spell he learned in the headmaster's hall. With that knowledge, he casts the spell, causing several stones to float in the air. This sudden display of magic startles the 3 attackers, who never expected Lin, a warden, to possess such magic. This is a surprising development in the manhwa. Lin smirks and doubles down on the intimidation, hoping to scare them off completely. Moments later, he points his wand at the group's leader and accidentally launches a stone at high speed. The impact knocks the group leader to the ground, leaving both Lin and the other 2 students shocked by what just happened. Realizing how out of control he is, Lin vows to work harder on his training to avoid similar mistakes in the future. Meanwhile, the other 2 students mutter something about Lin's attack, before deciding to stand their ground. To maintain his advantage, Lin suspends himself in the air, a truly epic manhwa moment, daring them to come at him if they wish to die. At this point, the 2 decide it is not worth it, grab their unconscious leader and retreat. With the confrontation over, Daru emerges from his hiding spot. Lin, still tense, asks if he is there to fight too. Having seen Lin's capabilities, Daru quickly denies it and sits by a campfire to explain the situation. When Lin learns that Muradi is the mastermind behind the ambush, he begins to understand the way of life in the White Tiger Tower. Unlike his own Blue Dragon Tower, where camaraderie and joy flourish, the White Tiger Tower operates under a strict hierarchy, a classic manhwa trope, often forcing its members to act in their master's interests. As Daru explains, Lin sketches Gel's face in the dirt to jog his memory, recalling the elf's face, and feels a pang of disappointment, as he initially thought Gel was a good guy. Realizing that Gel's actions contradict his appearance, Lin speculates on his motives and concludes that Gel, a key character in this manhwa, simply is playing his part in a larger scheme. Daru, noticing Lin's divided attention, calls him back to reality and continues to explain. Lin finds it strange that he was approached that way, but Daru clarifies the situation, explaining that as a member of the Warden family, Lin is a powerful political tool in this manhwa's world. Moreover, if Gel were to defeat someone like Lin, especially being a freshman, it would greatly elevate his own reputation and influence. Angered by Gel's intentions, Lin shares Daru's frustration. To avoid future confrontations, Daru advises Lin to be cautious, as it's clear the knights from the White Tiger Tower will continue to harbor negative feelings toward him, especially with his growing success in fencing classes. Gel, being a skilled manipulator typical of a manhwa antagonist, will undoubtedly exploit those feelings. Their meeting ends shortly after, and Lin returns to his tower, contemplating Daru's last words. Daru had advised him to avoid classes attended by the White Tiger Tower students, as this would reduce Gel's opportunities for action. Although the advice seems reasonable, Lin refuses to follow it. Firstly, classes like fencing are hard to get into, and secondly, the very idea of being dragged into their petty politics offends his pride. Determined to strike back in his own way, he injures himself and heads to the common room. This is a bold move in the manhwa. There, he gathers everyone's attention and claims that he was attacked by the White Tiger Tower students simply because he's from the Blue Dragon Tower. The room goes silent for a moment before erupting in anger. The students rally behind Lin, calling the knights despicable for attacking him. One student even suggests alerting everyone upstairs, since the White Tiger Tower students dared to mess with their savior. Lin watches as the students arm themselves for revenge. Alarmed by how quickly the situation is spiraling out of control, Lin tries to calm them down, insisting that there's no need to escalate things. However, one student reminds him of the debt they owe him for saving them from starvation with his meat. If this is how they're repaid, then so be it. As the chaos intensifies, Lean begins to feel guilty, realizing he has unintentionally started a war between the towers, a plot twist worthy of a manhwa. Soon, the students split into two groups, each determined to destroy the White Tiger Tower. At this point, Lean knows he's made a huge mistake, not knowing the depths of the rivalry between the towers, a common theme in this type of manhwa. Just as the crowd is about to march, Asan steps forward, urging everyone to wait and listen to him. He then addresses the crowd, warning them not to act impulsively, as the White Tiger Tower houses students from knightly families, and he points out that a reckless approach would almost certainly lead to their defeat. Lean, impressed by Asan's rationality, applauds him and supports his point of view. However, Asan interjects before Lean can explain his plan, suggesting they would have better odds if they kept a low profile and waited before attacking the White Tiger Tower students. As expected, the other students agree with Asan's suggestion and begin to prepare based on his idea. Lean is disappointed in himself for expecting more from a group of enraged students. Nonetheless, he knows he can't let a battle unfold because of his lie. He calls for order in the room and tells them he doesn't want revenge taken in his name, as this matter concerns his honor as a noble. He declares that he will settle it himself, a classic moment in any action manhwa. One of the students asks him how he plans to handle the students from the White Tiger Tower, reminding him of their cunning and pettiness. Lean takes a deep breath and appeals to their noble status, stating that stooping to the level of the White Tiger Tower students would dishonor their lineages. Struck by this logic, Hassan and the other students calm down and listen to him upon seeing his change in attitude. Lean tells them to remain vigilant and keep their weapons close in case the students from the White Tiger Tower attack, as their rivals will likely act as a group. He advises them to be prepared to defend their tower if necessary. This plan satisfies the vengeance-driven students, who are ready for a confrontation straight out of a manhwa, who agree to band together and stay ready for a confrontation after spreading the immediate threat of retaliation from the crowd. Lean disperses the crowd so everyone can return to their rooms. Meanwhile, Lean overhears two students talking about their upcoming class with the White Tiger Tower students and mentioning that they have already mastered illumination magic. This catches Lean by surprise, who wonders if he is the only one who has not yet mastered the spell. Determined to catch up, he spends the entire night practicing without sleep, just like a true manhwa protagonist. The next morning, Yoner wakes up early, surprised to find a visibly exhausted Lean sitting in a corner. Greeting him, she worriedly asks what's wrong, and he explains that he spent the night practicing magic. Yoner then asks him if he received permission to practice the spell, to which Lean nonchalantly replies that he did. He shares what he heard from the two students the day before, but Yoner dismisses it, questioning why he is bothered by it. Ignoring her comment, Lean notices Gando arriving unusually early and tries to greet him, but Gando ignores him and heads towards the fireplace. At the fireplace, Gando pulls a skewer of sausages from his coat and places it near the fire. Lean sneaks up from behind, assuring him that no one will steal his food. Startled, Gando asks him when Lean arrived in the room, and Lean explains that he has been there since Gando entered. He also advises Gando to check his skewer so it doesn't burn. As Gando tends to his food, Lean looks around and asks Yoner why everyone looks so downcast. Yoner explains that everyone is hungry, and they have only made it this far because Lean sold them food. Realizing the grave situation, Lean decides to prepare more rations, knowing his supply is about to run out. However, he is unsure how to deal with the professor's strict stance on sharing resources. Curious, Yoner asks him if there is any way to create an opportunity to take supplies, but Lean hasn't found a solution yet. An hour later, the students from the Blue Dragon and White Tiger Towers gather in Professor Garcia's classroom for their basic magic comprehension class. Although Professor Garcia cares deeply for her students, she quickly notices the animosity between the two towers, a tension often seen in Academy manhwa. In just 1 week at the Academy, hunger has worn everyone's patience thin, and the inter-tower rivalry has further stoked tensions, making for a classic manhwa setup. Despite her efforts to prevent conflict during class, the competitive atmosphere remains palpable. According to the director, the competition is supposed to strengthen the students. But Garcia privately disagrees and wishes for harmony among them. To regain control, she orders everyone to sit down, and the students in this manhwa obey. She then asks if anyone has managed to perform the illumination spell since their last class. Lean, confident, raises his hand, having spent the entire night mastering the spell. To his surprise, no one else raises their hand, and he looks for the student he overheard the previous night, and asks why they said they could perform the spell. The student, now embarrassed, admits they only have a general understanding but haven't managed to cast it successfully. Nervously, they assure Lean that they will achieve it soon, since they are nobles just like him. Realizing that those pretentious nobles tricked him, Lean feels frustrated for having worked so hard unnecessarily. However, Professor Garcia praises the two students from the Blue Dragon Tower, who raise their hands, revealing that the second is none other than Princess Arden. Hoping to make a good impression on her, Lean feels uncomfortable when he notices that she is staring at him intently. Confused by her intense gaze, Lean asks Asan about it. Asan explains that the princess seems to believe strange rumors about him. Intrigued, Lean asks what rumors, and Asan, visibly annoyed, reveals that she thinks the manhwa's protagonist is more focused on getting good grades than seeking genuine knowledge. Lean acknowledges the truth in the rumors, but makes sure that Asan doesn't find out about his true priorities. For his part, Asan expresses his disappointment in the princess, who believes such an absurd rumor. However, Lean reminds him that it's a free world in this manhwa, and the princess has the right to believe whatever she wants. Impressed by Lean's words, Asan slams his hand on the desk and praises Lean for being the most magnanimous person he has ever met. Right there in class, Asan goes on a rant, muttering nonsense about the children of his tower coming from great families, with Lean being the noblest of them all. After thanking his father for sending him to this school to meet someone like Lean, Asan tearfully proclaims that Lean is a good guy. Lean, as confused as anyone else, ignores him and continues to focus on the lesson. Shortly after, Lean and the princess are called to the podium to demonstrate the illumination spell they claim to have learned. Both manage to cast the spell perfectly, impressing Professor Garcia and the entire class in a stunning manhwa panel. Garcia congratulates them for being the first students to successfully perform the spell within the first week of learning it. While praising them, she notices the dejected expressions of the other students, who failed to learn the spell in time. She encourages them not to be disheartened, reminding them that illumination magic is the most basic form of magic and an essential step in this manhwa's power system to understanding how magic works. As Garcia motivates the class, this manhwa really delves into the fundamentals. Lean observes that the students aren't paying attention, too busy arguing among themselves. When Garcia finishes speaking, she orders them to calm down and return to their seats. Despite her orders, the manhwa shows the students of the towers. Blue Dragon and White Tiger continue to trade insults. Garcia notices that some students from the Blue Dragon Tower are harassing those from the White Tiger Tower, and hoping to change the class's focus, she announces they will be studying elemental magic for the semester. Upon hearing this, the class gets excited at the thought of studying something more dynamic in their first year. Garcia explains that mastering light magic will help them gain a basic understanding of magic, and then introduces the fundamentals of elemental magic, a staple in many a manhwa, explaining that it consists of basic elements: water, fire, earth, wind, darkness, and more advanced attributes like gravitational magic. These elements serve as the foundation for all other magical disciplines and are crucial for assigning attributes to artifacts. To illustrate the importance of mastering even basic elemental magic, she compares it to understanding mathematical operations and emphasizes that mastering it will earn them respect throughout the continent. After her explanation, Garcia moves on to the practical part. She announces that the students will test their affinity with the basic elements to determine which one suits them best. Murmurs are heard excitedly throughout the classroom, with many students hoping to excel at fire magic. Garcia calls for order in the class and conjures lit candles on each desk. She instructs the students to use their knowledge from previous lessons to create fire, not just light this time. Before they begin, she warns them to be careful, as fire is much more dangerous than light. To demonstrate, Garcia chants an incantation and conjures a huge pillar of fire, a classic manhwa moment that captivates the noble students. Even Lean, who tries not to react too enthusiastically, can't help but admire how impressive the magic looks. Afterward, Garcia asks if the students are ready to try the spell. As expected, they jump right in, many struggling and nearly injuring themselves in the process. Lean, however, he remains calm like a true manhwa protagonist and contemplates why the professor provided candles, recalling the mantra about visualizing objects close to him. He gains the necessary confidence to attempt the spell. As he concentrates on his mana, Garcia notices it's out of control and quickly intervenes, stopping him before he can continue. She announces that Lean will be forbidden from practicing fire magic for now. When Lean asks why, Garcia explains that learning fire magic is too dangerous for him at his current level. Reflecting on her words, Lean recalls how intensely bright the light spell he cast was before, and realizes that if he couldn't control light, creating fire could have disastrous consequences, a common plot point in this kind of manhwa. To avoid such risks, Garcia advises Lean to practice water magic instead, as it is much safer. She encourages him to return to fire magic once he has developed finer control over his mana. Although frustrated at first, as he considers fire magic to be much more interesting than water magic. Lin eventually reconsiders. He acknowledges that although fire and lightning magic are powerful and offensive, water magic offers its own versatility. At least for now, he'll have access to drinking water wherever he goes, a practical skill for any Manhwa adventurer, which is a small consolation. Resigned to his fate, Lin begins to practice his water magic. Meanwhile, Asan, sitting nearby, envies Lin for receiving special instruction from the professor. Lin glares at him and with a forced smile tells him to shut up. Shortly after, Lin admires the bowl of water on his desk and commands it to rise while pointing his wand at it. His first attempt fails, but Lin, eager to learn fire magic as soon as possible, tries again and again until he finally succeeds on his third try. Infusing enough mana into the water, he transforms it into a large globe of liquid, pure liquid that floats in the air. The whole class erupts in surprise. A classic scene in any Magic Academy manhwa. Garcia praises Lin for his success and announces that he has a natural affinity for the water element. Everyone applauds him for a job well done, except for the students from the White Tiger Tower and the Princess Harden. To keep jealousy at bay, Garcia reassures the other students, telling them there's no need to feel impatient just because they haven't succeeded yet. She explains that a person's elemental affinity is closely related to the environment they grew up in. For example, someone raised in an area with strong winds would likely have an affinity for wind, while someone raised in a blacksmith's forge would lean towards fire. She stresses that the more familiar one is with an element, the easier it is to imagine and control. Hearing this, Lin finds his affinity for water strange, since he wasn't raised near water or lived on a fishing boat. Thinking back on his past life, a common trope in isekai manhwa, he recalls that his crazy professors subjected him to drowning torture in graduate school, and concludes that perhaps this is the reason he has a natural connection to water. As he concentrates on keeping the water globe suspended, he notices someone staring daggers at him from the back of the classroom. Turning around, he sees Princess Harden shooting him a death glare. Annoyed by her antics, Lin loses focus and tries to catch her in the act. But the moment he does, the water globe explodes, completely drenching him. Garcia laughs at the mishap and warns Lin not to get distracted next time. With a flick of her wand, she dries him off right where he stands. Touched by her gesture, Lin calls Garcia the light of the school and asks her how long he should keep the water globe suspended. Garcia replies that normally he should maintain it until he runs out of mana, but since that's unlikely for him, she cheerfully suggests he keep it up until the end of the lesson. Lin is shocked, a familiar sight for any manhwa protagonist, suspecting Garcia might be punishing him under the guise of teaching him. As she walks away, he weakly calls out to her for help, but she ignores him and goes to assist other students. At that moment, Lin reflects on the theatrical nature of the academy he attends. If Garcia can be a professor here, she's probably just as unhinged as the rest of the staff in this academy manhwa. Throughout the lesson, Garcia keeps an eye on Lin, who is visibly distressed by the task of maintaining the magic for an extended period, a mentally exhausting exercise. Garcia, aware of how demanding it is, believes Lin needs rigorous training to gain better control over his mana. His ability to create a water globe so large in just 3 attempts reveals exceptional talent, and, combined with his seemingly infinite mana reserve, she sees his potential of perfecting him to turn him into an extraordinary mage after offering some words of encouragement. Garcia leaves Lin wondering if all the teachers in this school are completely insane, a common trope in many a manhwa. When the lesson finally ends for the week, everyone returns to their dorms. A few days later, Lin visits Urugam's cabin and helps him tend to his garden. While they work, Lin shares his frustrations about Garcia's class, asking Urugam for advice. Urugam listens patiently as Lin recounts how Arden succeeded with fire magic, Jonar discovered his affinity for wind, and poor Gando nearly set his staff on fire during practice. Lin complains that while his classmates were doing something exciting, he spent the entire lesson staring at an orb of water. In response, Urugam suggests that Garcia might be giving him special treatment because he likes him. Unsatisfied with the answer, Lin laughs and accuses Urugam of making him work in his garden. Urugam reminds him that he volunteered for the task in exchange for a meal, and a flashback shows Lin enthusiastically offering his help just so he could eat. When Lin tries to negotiate to take some food back to his dorm, Urugam refuses and orders him to put the rations back. As Urugam takes a sip of his tea, he comments on how strange it is that Lin comes from a family like the Wardens. Curious, he asks about the tension with the White Tiger Tower. Lin admits the situation isn't good. Urugam reflects that history is likely repeating itself, and Lin realizes the rivalry between the towers has probably always been this way. As Lin understands the tense relationships, he expresses frustration with the constant fighting, a staple of action manhwa. especially since they already have enough to deal with managing their studies. Impressed by Lean's reasoning, Urugum advises him to ignore anyone who tries to start a fight and to focus on improving his magic. After a moment of silence, Lean confesses that he has already fought with them. Hearing Lean's words, Urugum looks disappointed, which makes Lean ask him not to look at him like that, since he's upset too. Urugum, knowing that fights don't usually break out in the first week, asks Lean how it happened. When Lean explains that the students from the White Tiger Tower started a fight with him during fencing class, Urugum almost chokes in disbelief and demands to know why Lean was in their territory in the first place. Lean replies that he's free to choose his subjects, and eventually, Urugum calms down. Realizing the damage is already done, he warns Lean to be careful, as the students from the White Tiger Tower in this manhwa are known to be aggressive, are skilled fighters, unlike Lean, who is a mage at heart. Lean then mentions that 3 of their best fighters attacked him at once. Urugum, disgusted by their foolishness, stands up in silence, a dramatic moment worthy of a manhwa panel. Confused, Lean asks him where he's going, but Urugum simply tells him to stop working for the day and come inside the cabin to eat. Surprised, Lean asks if he's serious, and Urugum assures him he is. It turns out Urugum feels compelled to be nice to the monster in front of him, probably so Lean won't come after him when he inevitably has his manhwa power-up and becomes the best swordsman in the Empire. Moments later, Urugum sighs in relief as he watches Lean enjoy the meal he prepared after eating. Lean feels curious and asks if Urugum has been maintaining the entire cabin by himself. Urugum explains that the others who were supposed to help him were too lazy and eventually left. He concludes that hard work, like tending the garden, is fundamental for an alchemist, a lesson often seen in a training arc manhwa. Although Lean has trouble connecting the labor-intensive tasks with alchemy, he still agrees with Urugum's sentiment. Privately, however, he resolves not to settle for less, especially after enduring a difficult past life, a common trope in many a manhwa. Lean then asks if he can grow crops in the empty field, and Urugum gives him the green light. When asked what he plans to grow, Lean suggests cabbage or spring onions, and although Urugum has no objections, he asks if Lean plans to sell the harvest. Surprised, Lean asks if his peers also tried this, leading Urugum to exclaim that Lean is the first scoundrel to pull such a stunt. After his outburst, Urugum simply shakes his head, recognizing Lean's unusual, manhwa protagonist-like nature, and tells him to do as he pleases. Lean starts thinking about recipes to avoid eating the vegetables raw, asking Urugum if there's anything he can make with the cabbage and spring onions, and Urugum suggests a stew, adding that combining them with a few other ingredients would make a great dish. He also explains that the food culture varies across the empire. For example, the folks from the western region are known for their bread and cheese-based cuisine, while the eastern region's food culture, similar to Korean cuisine, revolves around rice, noodles, and chili paste. Lean then asks if Urugum likes stew. Urugum admits he does, but he avoids it because it's Eastern food. Curious, Lean asks him if something happened to make him feel that way. Urugum explains that his distant elderly relatives live in the East and, whenever they see him, they scold him for being broke and not visiting them more often. Pretending to understand, Lean wonders just how strict the people from the East are. After venting, Urugum asks Lean about his plans for the weekend. When Lean asks if he needs him to work, Urugum gets offended and asks if Lean thinks he's a slave driver. In that moment, which feels straight out of a campus life manhwa, Lean reflects on how useless his graduate school professors were in his past life, forcing him to do mandatory lab work on weekends. Changing the subject, Urugum tells Lean that he probably won't have time to come to the cabin and then asks what he thinks the hungry students will do. When Lean suggests they might set the school on fire, Urugum dismisses the idea as extreme. Instead, he explains that cornered students always find a way to survive, just like in a survival manhwa. He predicts that the Black Turtle Tower students will forage for fruit, the White Tiger Tower students will hunt, and the Blue Dragon Tower students, despite being talented, will probably take their time before reacting. However, this year, Urugum expects things to be different with Lean, who seems to be changing the whole script of this manhwa. Finally, Lean asks about the students from the Phoenix Tower. Urugum explains they aren't easily swayed by hunger, as they are disciples of the Order and rely on prayer in dire situations. Although Lean is impressed by their faith, it's not the path he wishes to follow. With that, Lean decides he will go hunting with his friends on the weekend. If another fight breaks out, he plans to ensure he has more allies than his opponents next time, a classic manhwa strategy. Hearing this, Urugum scoffs and asks Lean if he's trying to avoid fighting the tigers, because they might act differently than he expects. Lean retorts by asking what Urugum thinks they might try to do. Urugum replies that they might try to escape the torture of the Magic Academy. Lean, without an immediate answer, reflects on what an impenetrable fortress the Magic Academy is. like something out of a fantasy manhwa. It's surrounded by castle walls reinforced with magic. Despite its defenses, he knows some students attempt to escape every year. Honestly, he can't blame them. It's natural to long for the life necessities they lack. New clothes, proper shoes, good food, and freedom from the academy's oppressive atmosphere. Noticing Lean's distracted expression, Urugum yells at him, accusing him of daydreaming again. Snapping out of it, Lean listens as Urugum explains that the students from the White Tiger Tower are usually the first to try escaping each year because they're so simple-minded. Lean then asks if anyone has ever successfully escaped, realizing that even if he tells Lean about past successes, it won't stop him from trying. Urugum gives up and says Lean can do whatever he wants, as suffering more while young will only make him stronger. Just as Urugum turns to leave, Lean assures him he has no intention of escaping. Urugum, irritated, tells him to say that again after wiping the drool off his face. In the next scene, Daru is cornered in a dimly lit room by three hooded figures, a scene straight out of a thriller manhwa. With his back against the wall, he starts to lose focus until one of the figures threatens to harm him if he doesn't cooperate. Daru, already suspecting the hooded figures are Lean and his friends, scoffs and tells them there's no need to go this far. Realizing their cover is blown, Lean pulls off his hood and asks how convincing their charade was. Gando, the third hooded figure, is shocked to find that Lean knows the person they were supposed to be intimidating. Daru, unimpressed, calls them ridiculous, comparing them to little squirrels trying to threaten him. While Gando throws a tantrum for being called a squirrel, Lean calmly pulls back the curtains, letting in the sunlight, and tells Gando to chill out. Joner, the second hooded figure, asks why Lean is going to such lengths for Daru. Lean explains that he initially avoided being nice to Daru to prevent the White Tigers from getting the wrong idea about him. Lean then asks Daru if the White Tigers already have a negative impression of him. Daru, impressed by Lean's cunning, confirms his suspicions, admitting that kindness would likely cause misunderstandings. This level of strategic thinking is a highlight in any good manhwa. Lean waves it off and declares that Daru will now serve as his spy in the White Tiger Tower. Daru, offended by the title, blushes and protests, but Lean reminds him that he once promised to report on Murat's actions. Still, Daru insists on a more dignified title. Gando, who had been quiet for a while, asks why Daru hates being called a spy. Daru glares at him, effectively silencing him. Lean steps in, reframing the role as one of honor and justice, rather than calling him a spy. Lean solemnly names him an internal informant, highlighting the noble duty of fighting injustice from within. The dramatic title, a classic manhwa trope, resonates with Daru, who finds it dignified enough. Satisfied with the name change, Daru accepts the role, and they shake on it. Seeing how Lihan effortlessly wins Daru's support, Joner feels uneasy, wondering what dark lessons this manhwa character has inherited. Lihan from his corrupt family. With the deal sealed, Lihan shifts his focus and concentrates on the real reason he gathered everyone so early on a weekend, to plan their escape from the academy. Joner and Gando are excited by the idea, but Daru is surprised to hear such bold words from the protagonist of this manhwa. Daru asks Lihan if he is serious, and Lihan, anticipating this reaction, prepares to present the 10 reasons he has thought of to convince him. Before he can begin, Daru admits that he is surprised that Lihan is also considering escaping, just like him. Lihan concludes that even though Daru comes from a canine family, deep down he is still a noble. He knows that the students of the White Tiger Tower, having never experienced real hunger, are struggling more with the starvation they now face. Meanwhile, in the common room of the White Tiger Tower, this manhwa's drama continues to unfold. Tensions are rising as several students, fed up with days of hunger, suggest hunting to humiliate the proud students of the Blue Dragon Tower who boast about their magic. The room becomes chaotic until Gel and his minions arrive, bringing order with an important announcement. Once the room calms down, Gel acknowledges that hunting is a good idea, but questions if it will be easy in the nearby forest. He reminds them that the monster bear they killed last week was released by Professor Urugun. If they expect to hunt similar creatures, they will have to venture deeper into unknown territory, a classic manhwa adventure. The knights grumble about their lack of familiarity with the forest, and one of them asks Gel if he has an alternative plan. Smiling, Gel promises that he will find a way to get them out of the academy, so they can eat meat without risking their lives. His colleagues feel hopeful after hearing Gel's plan, but one of them asks if it has a high success rate. He assures the fool that he has already devised a way out in his head. If they want, they can join, as he doesn't intend to keep the plan to himself. However, if they choose to follow him, they must agree to give his orders the utmost priority. If any of them does something reckless and ruins his plan, he promises to punish them. With that, Gel wishes them good night and leaves the common room to return to his dorm, a classic power move in any manhwa. With his companions, Daru rushes to Lehan and informs him about everything. Having heard all about Gel's speech, Lehan asks Daru if it's possible for him to join the plan if he listens to Gel. Daru and the others are surprised to hear this and ask him if he is seriously considering the idea after what happened between them last time. In response, Lehan says that Gel wouldn't care about something so trivial. After observing the expressions of his partners in crime a bit longer, Lehan realizes he has been bluffing all along. Really, things have just gotten complicated. Initially, Lehan planned to take his time finding a way out, since escaping the academy in this manhwa would be difficult, given the professor's personalities, but now that Gel claims to know a way out, Lehan needs to get that information from him. Knowing this, Lehan recognizes that Gel is not as naive as Gando. He's a tough, cold leader, typical of a rival character in a manhwa who won't hesitate to use the students in his tower for his own purposes. So if Marathi says he can escape, he must be serious. And Lean needs to figure out how he plans to do it. With this in mind, Lean decides to take a calculated approach. Without hesitation, he instructs Daru to follow Gel and find out his escape plan. Surprised, Daru protests, asking if Lean is serious about giving him that task. Lean asks if he has a better idea, and Daru admits the plan feels a bit dishonorable. Lean tells Daru to consider that they are in the middle of a confrontation, then reminds him of the famous saying, "Know your enemy, know yourself." And as he pats him on the shoulder, he explains that this is just a tactic to discover the enemy's plans before it backfires. At this point, Daru is worried about how persuasive Lean has become recently, almost like a protagonist from a fantasy manhwa. He wonders if it's because of his appearance or if he's just imagining things. Either way, now that he's heard what he needs to, Daru accepts that it's a tactical move, and Lean happily tells him to start watching Gel Marathi. From that day on, Lean instructs Daru to come to him immediately when he discovers the plan and to report all the details. Furthermore, he boosts Daru's ego by calling him an incredible warrior and an honorable inside informant before pushing him out the door. As he leaves, Lean reminds him to start his mission immediately and wishes him luck. Daru, confident, assures him to leave it in his hands and promises to return soon with results. After closing the door, Lean sighs in relief, having handled Daru for now. Now he must think about the escape plan, but before he can do so, he is confronted by his confused friends John, Ed, and Gando. They jokingly ask him if he has learned some kind of brainwashing magic before joining the academy. Lean can't blame them, he knows how persuasive he can be, a skill often seen in a manhwa protagonist. But he assures them he hasn't learned any manipulation magic yet. Hours later, Lean gathers his friends, Daru, Yoner, Gando, and Nilia for their first meeting about the escape. Nilia, who hasn't been brought up to speed on Lean's plans, flares up and confronts him for being foolish enough to think he can just leave the academy, as if this were some prison break manhwa. Understanding her reaction, Lean tells her not to worry because he has a plan. Remembering Lean's family, Nilia concludes that he probably has something up his sleeve, since he's different from the others, as she asks him to explain his brilliant plan. Lean reveals that Gel is the mastermind behind the escape, and in a twist worthy of a manhwa, says they are all going to follow him and copy whatever he does. Disappointed by such a poorly thought-out plan, Nilia tries to talk some sense into Lean. Yoner, already having figured out what's at stake, signals Lean to go along with his tactic and asks him if their plan will succeed without Nilia's help. Catching the hint, Lean quickly replies that there's no way they can do it without her. Realizing the game, Lean flatters Nilia, telling her that his plan heavily depends on her tracking skills and hunter's instincts. Seconds later, his trick works, as Nilia blushes, not knowing what to do. Yoner and Lean keep making things up as they go, improvising their script like they are in a manhwa, feeling that she is the only one capable of making it work. After reviewing their plans one last time, Lean dismisses his group, instructing them to meet later that night. When night falls, Gel, his friends, and the honorable knights gather at their meeting spot to finally execute their escape plan and leave the hellish school, once and for all. Encouraged by his peers' support, Gel feels more confident, ready to lead them like a true manhwa protagonist, and urges them to follow him to freedom. Pulling a worn-out papyrus sheet from his coat, he reassures himself thinking that as long as he has the map, he won't fail. In a flashback to 1 month before Gel started at the magic school, the young noble elf knight is seen ordering his servants to search the family library for any literature that could help him at school. After going through countless texts and finding nothing useful, Gel gets frustrated and yells at his servants, who apologize profusely for their apparent incompetence. Annoyed, Gel orders them to bring him something actually useful, since everything they've offered so far has been worthless. Kicking a pile of books in frustration, Gel accidentally discovers the same papyrus he now holds. Upon examining it, he finds a detailed escape map of Enrogar. At the time, he dismissed it as a relic meant for struggling students, but now, after enduring the harsh realities of Enrogar, he's grateful he kept it. Back in the present, Gel and his group follow the map's directions towards a secret exit in the Enar Mountains. Unbeknownst to them, Lean, Milliner, Gando, Ninja, and Derulo are carefully following, making sure to stay out of sight. In a classic Manhwa stealth scene, the students from the White Tiger Tower take a break, and Lean signals his group to move, ensuring they don't lose sight of their targets. Seeing the group head deep into the rugged mountains, Lean realizes the route is anything but ordinary. Checking if everyone is ready, the ever-useless Gando questions why they're climbing mountains when there's a gate near the castle. Instead of answering the absurd question, Lean delegates Gando to Daru, who rolls his eyes in agreement. Confused, Gando demands an explanation. Lean begins by listing everyone's strengths: Amelia's unmatched mountain climbing ability, his incredible stamina along with Daru's, and John's familiarity with mountain paths from his gathering experience. He then humorously mentions his own strengths, which are nothing. A short while later, Gando proves Lean right, panting for air and begging for water after just a few miles of climbing. Eventually, Daru has to carry Gando while the rest continue trekking the unfamiliar paths during their ascent, a moment of comic relief common in many a manhwa. Lean takes a moment to thank Nilia for joining them, acknowledging that her tracking skills have made it possible to follow the students of the White Tiger Tower without being detected. Without her, their mission would have failed before it even began. Unable to resist his habit of documenting events, Lean pulls out a sheet of paper from his uniform and starts writing about their experience. Suddenly, Nilia signals for everyone to stop. When Lean asks what's wrong, she mentions that the students from the Tower of the White Tiger are acting strangely, as they have stopped. Gando speculates that they have arrived at their destination, but Lean doubts it's that simple. Moments later, a strange wind begins to blow, a classic manhwa cliffhanger. It brushes past him, and Lean feels a familiar chill, the kind he only feels when the director is near, hoping it's a monster causing the unease. He asks Nilia, but she assures him she has already checked. His worst fear comes true, as the director's familiar laughter echoes in the night sky. The students of the White Tiger Tower struggle to comprehend what is happening, as the director's enormous skull-like appearance looms over them, announcing that he has caught them, trying to escape in their first week. In a classic manhwa twist, they realize the director has been the ominous observer stalking them. The students of the White Tiger Tower are terrified, realizing just how doomed they are. The director recognizes the map in Gel's hands and reveals that it's one of the fake maps he distributes to trick prospective students. Gel, shocked, demands a clarification, but the director, upon learning that Gel obtained the map before entering the academy, destroys it. He warns the students not to trust maps from unknown origins, explaining that they could be treasure maps or traps set by a wicked undead. Witnessing the horror unfold, Lean concludes, the director is a complete madman, like a villain from a dark fantasy manhwa, who cares little about teaching and seems to delight in punishing others. The undead then orders all the students to return to the academy, but reveals an unexpected twist, using summoning magic. He explains the rules of a new challenge. The students must evade the pursuers he is about to summon and return safely. They are allowed to use any means necessary to defeat the pursuers, a classic rule, but if they are caught, they will be guilty of attempting to escape. However, if they manage to avoid capture, no charges will be filed. Shortly after laying out the challenge's rules, the students of the White Tiger Tower scatter, running for their lives as the pursuers begin their relentless hunt. Meanwhile, a terrified Nilia yells at Lean, demanding that he stop standing around and start running to avoid being seen. Lean takes her restless hand and asks her to calm down. Nilia, with a trembling voice, asks how he expects her to be calm when their lives are on the line. Lean gently assures her that the skeletons haven't noticed them yet. Besides, he adds that even if they get caught, they'll just be sent to the punishment room. Horrified, Nilia takes a deep breath and explains that she's heard rumors about the punishment room being filled with torture devices and that no one has ever escaped from it. Like a typical manhwa protagonist, Lean is unfazed, muttering a dismissive remark and leaving her in Yoner's care, while he keeps watching the skeletons roaming the area. Lean racks his brain, trying to devise a plan to get them out of there undetected. Not far away, the students of the White Tiger Tower prepare for battle, forming a basic combat formation to face the skeletons head-on. Realizing that escaping is a lost cause, they gather their courage and decide to fight for their honor and their knightly code. Watching from a distance, Lean wonders why anyone would care about honor or a code in such a desperate situation, a common theme in this manhwa. Just then, Daru appears behind him, claiming to have a solid plan for escape. In Daru's mind, The plan is to fight alongside the students of the White Tiger Tower to combine their forces and break the encirclement. However, before he can explain, Lean misunderstands his intention. Assuming that Daru wants to use the students from the White Tiger Tower as a distraction while his group escapes. The others quickly agree to this plan, leaving Daru questioning why he even bothered. As Lihan continues to observe the skeletons, he realizes they need to break through the weakest point of the encirclement. Even though the tigers are buying them time, there's still no opening. After a moment of deep thought, Lihan looks up and notices something strange. The director is still summoning more pursuers from the underworld, like a scene from a dark fantasy manhwa. Initially, Lihan had thought the director's challenge offered a real chance to escape, but now he suspects the lunatic never intended to let anyone succeed. Upon further reflection, Lihan considers that this might be the director's way of making the challenge as grueling as possible. With no clear way out and the tigers being captured one by one, Lihan considers giving up on this deadly manhwa challenge. Just as he's about to call it quits, he realizes something. The skeletons' disinterest in their side of the forest must mean they don't even know his group is there. Lihan recalls a similar tactic the director used during a previous lesson, leading him to suspect that the director they're seeing now might be a clone or an illusion, a classic trope in any good manhwa. Acting on this theory, Lihan devises a new plan. Go in the opposite direction of the tigers. He quickly gathers his group and urges them to climb higher up the mountain. For the next 30 minutes, they ascend until they find a dark cave nearby. Nydia performs her characteristic monster check, and then signals that it's safe to enter. Inside, Lihan casts an illumination spell, brightening the surroundings. For the first time in hours, the group takes a moment to rest as they settle in. As they relax, Jonar asks if the skeletons will follow them inside the cave. Nydia assures them that it doesn't seem like the skeletons are pursuing them. However, Daru reminds them of the real problem. How long will the summoned skeletons persist? He insists that charging through the encirclement might have been the better option. Lihan counters by explaining that the skeletons' numbers made such a charge impossible for their small group. This whole manhwa scenario felt designed to wear them down. Some sausages and asks everyone to eat. When Nydia realizes her water bottle is empty, Lihan uses water magic to create drinking water and fill her bottle. Amazed by the beauty and convenience of water magic, Nydia comments on how useful it would be around the house, a rare moment of peace in this manhwa. A moment later, a feverish Jonar asks for someone to start a fire. Nydia obliges, successfully conjuring flames with her fire magic. Lihan congratulates her, and she admits she's relieved it worked on her first try, as her previous attempts had failed. She also expresses jealousy of Lihan's water magic, wishing she had a spell as versatile as those seen in a popular manhwa. Lihan dismisses her envy, calling water magic boring, and urges her to appreciate her fire magic, which many would wish to possess. Nydia, noticing his pained expression, agrees and returns to her food. Hours later, Nydia and Lihan go outside to check on the skeleton activity below. Seeing the swarming monsters, Lihan mutters that the director is a lunatic. Nydia nervously asks if it's okay to insult him. Lihan, ever the pragmatist, explains that magic thrives on free thought, a common theme in this kind of manhwa, and encourages her to express herself freely, spurred by his words. Nydia lets out a string of insults at the director, calling him a crazy skeleton and wishing for wolves to get him at night. Her tirade is cut short when a figure suddenly appears behind them. Startled, Nydia clings to Lean, apologizing profusely for her outburst, thinking it's the director. However, upon a closer look, Lean recognizes the silhouette in a scene straight out of a manhwa. It's Gel and his 3 henchmen. Stepping into the light, Gel demands to know what Lean's group is doing on this side of the mountain. Instead of fighting Gel and his lackeys, Lean kindly invites them to return to the cave so they can rest and recover their strength. When the others see the enemy calmly enter their shelter, Gando protests, asking why they're letting them in when they don't even have enough food. Mistaking Lean's actions for respect and honor, Drugu silences Gando and admires Lean's maturity. While drinking the water Lean offered them earlier, Gel wonders how the Blue Dragons group, the protagonists of this manhwa, managed to reach the mountain. Instead of realizing they might have followed him, Gel concludes they must have used the same map he had found. Now, at a stalemate, he feels conflicted, especially after receiving help from Lean. He soon recalls the Mora family motto, "We remember our grudges, struggling to remember the rest." He finally remembers the continuation. Debts are only repaid when you remember them. This means that as long as Gel chooses to forget the favor he owes Lean, he won't need to repay it. Deciding to bide his time, he resolves to feign friendship until he can pull a classic manhwa betrayal and stab Lean in the back later when the danger has passed. With this in mind, Gel asks Lean to explain their current situation, but before Lean can answer, one of Gel's henchmen collapses. Alarmed, Gando and Drugu wonder what's happening. while another of Gel's lackeys checks on the fallen companion. He and the remaining one also feel drowsy and collapse shortly after. In a panic, Gel demands an explanation from Lean, only to notice the smug look on his face, a classic manhwa protagonist expression, as he realizes what has happened. Gel accuses Lean of poisoning the water. Lean calmly confirms it, emptying the rest of his own water and telling Gel that it's already too late, the effects should kick in any moment. Despite making empty threats, Gel soon succumbs to the drowsiness and falls asleep. With phase 1 of his plan complete, Lean, our clever manhwa hero, mentally checks it off his to-do list. Although his actions may seem extreme, Lean justifies them by reasoning that since Gel has already decided to hate him for no reason, he might as well give him a real one. Meanwhile, Gando and Drugu demand an explanation, thinking they've also been poisoned. Johnny steps in, urging them to calm down and explaining that the water they drank hadn't been tampered with. Nydia reassures them further, confirming they hadn't tampered with the group's water. When Gando asks why they weren't informed, Lean bluntly replies that it's because they are the dumbest ones in the group, a common trope for side characters in a manhwa. He was sure their reactions would give the plan away, no matter how much they tried to pretend everything was fine. He clarifies that his actions weren't personal, just necessary under the circumstances. With that cleared up, Lean urges everyone to remain calm, so they can move the sleeping henchmen near the pursuers. The plot of this manhwa thickens as Daru wonders if it's really necessary to go this far, but Leon reminds him of Gel's personality, and recognizing Gel's treacherous nature, Daru reluctantly allows Leon to proceed. Then, curious, he asks where Leon got the drugs. Johnner steps in, explaining that he had identified some sleep-inducing herbs near the cave and had mentioned them to Leon. When ground into a powder and mixed with water, the herbs' sedative effects are potent enough to make anyone drowsy within minutes. Leon admits he asked him to collect some, anticipating they might need them later, though Johnner didn't expect to use them this way. He didn't mind, as long as Leon was leading. After carrying the 4 unconscious individuals to a path near the pursuers, Leon's group retreats to a safe place to watch. Minutes later, the pursuers arrive and take the 4 back to the academy. Satisfied, Leon reassures his team, assuring them the pursuers will disperse soon. Now that they're safe, he proposes finishing their next task, exploring the area, a classic mission in this kind of manhwa. To answer some lingering questions, for example, he wants to know how far the academy walls extend and if there's truly no escape route. Even discovering just one piece of new information would make the effort worthwhile. Without wasting time, Leon leads the group forward, and they follow. As they venture deeper into the unknown forest, Gando kicks a rock and nearly tumbles down a small hill. Fortunately, Leon is there to catch him in time. When asked if he's okay, Gando complains about being both hurt and hungry. Noticing the group's fatigue, Leon considers taking a break. Just then, Milia suggests they find some light, as traveling in the dark is making the journey difficult. Agreeing, Leon casts a spell to illuminate their path. Moments later, a strong wind blows through the forest, and a mysterious voice suddenly speaks up, a classic trope in a fantasy manhwa, asking them to put out the light, as it's disturbing its sleep. Startled, Leon demands the speaker reveal themselves. The voice, unfazed, tells the group to remain silent, assuring them that it will be the one asking the questions. After searching, Leon and his companions trace the source of the voice to a gigantic tree, alive and speaking to them, a sight straight out of a manhwa. Continuing, the tree's voice promises to treat them as important guests if they answer its question correctly. However, if they get it wrong, they will be expelled from its space. Shortly after, the tree poses a riddle to the students about a dwarf who lights candles at night, 2 of which are blown out by a strong wind. Angered by this, the dwarf blocks all the windows in the room. The tree then asks them how many candles are left. Leon realizes the trick in the question and carefully analyzes the scenario before answering, like a true manhwa protagonist. Just as he is about to answer, the foolish Prince Gando, without a care, shouts, 3 candles. Leon fears what might happen next, but to his surprise, the tree declares that 3 candles is the correct answer. Confused, Leon asks why, since it's commonly understood that the flames would go out as the candles burn down. The tree explains that in riddles like this, the candles are magically infused, so they never go out, a common fantasy manhwa explanation. Now that they have answered correctly, the tree proposes asking one more question before treating them as guests. The student who answers correctly will receive a gift, and Leon's group prepares for the second question. The tree describes someone who is huge in the morning, shrinks at noon, grows larger in the afternoon, and disappears at night, only to repeat the same size every day. Who is this person? The question is not as direct as the first one, so the group takes its time to think. Finally, Lean suggests that the answer could be a shadow, and he asks the tree if he is correct. As expected, he is right, leaving his companions wondering how he guessed it. Lean explains that he had heard the same riddle before in his past life, a common trope in many a manhwa, which made it an easy guess. The riddle is famous for having been solved by the King of Thieves, Udu. Though the story changes slightly with each retelling, humans tend to give similar answers. While Lean reflects on the connection between the riddles of his past world and this one, the tree praises his intelligence and opens a path to welcome the students. When Lean and his companions enter the inner forest, they are surprised and overjoyed to see beautiful spirits decorating the space, a scene straight out of a fantasy manhwa. The tree offers Lean a green drink to refresh himself after the journey. Lean smells the drink and notes that it smells like vegetable juice. After thanking the tree, he drinks it without hesitation, and immediately feels his muscle fatigue disappear, as if he were drinking cold water after hours of walking under a hot Sunday. While Lean enjoys the drink, the others are still hesitant to even take a sip. When Lean finishes, the tree collects the cup and asks him if he liked the drink. Lean replies that it was delicious and asks how to make more. Before sharing the recipe, the tree asks to know his name. Lean introduces himself properly, but the tree insists on knowing his last name. When Lean mentions Vas, the tree becomes visibly frightened and apologizes for its earlier reaction, explaining that the rumors about his family caused its behavior. Seeing that, Lean introduced himself without relying on his family name. The tree assures him that he is destined to become a great mage, a fitting role for any manhwa protagonist. Then, the tree asks them what they are doing so far from the school, especially at night. Leo and Gondo almost spit out their drinks at the question, and a nervous Lean claims they are simply enjoying a night walk. Suspecting the truth, the tree asks them if they are trying to escape the academy, since it is barely their first week. The tree questions if they are truly prepared to escape. Lean admits that they have personal reasons, and asks the tree spirit for advice. The tree reveals that there is a way out of the academy, but new students cannot escape through it. Lean then asks how far the walls extend. The tree explains that no one knows for sure, because dangerous magics surround the walls, a security measure often seen in a Magic Academy manhwa, and anyone who touches them recklessly would suffer immense pain. Realizing that escaping by finding the end of the walls is not feasible, Lean considers other possibilities. Despite this, the tree advises against trying to escape for now, warning that although everything is quiet now, the monsters will awaken in a few weeks. The entire manhwa is about to get more intense, but the tree is surprised to see him still so thoughtful. Curious, the tree decides to observe him more, and proceeds to present its reward. Shortly after, the tree conjures an artifact, reminding Lean of Garcia's lessons about artifacts as essential tools for mages, a common theme in many a manhwa, although most new students are dissatisfied with what the academy provides. That night marks the moment Lean becomes the first student to receive a new staff from the Triad Tree Spirit. After giving him the staff, the tree asks his opinion on its finest creation. Lean comments that the staff feels warm and full of life. At that moment, the tree spirit realizes that Lean is no ordinary child. Much like a typical manhwa protagonist, the staff it gave him possesses a spirit that should have been impossible for someone his age to detect. Recognizing Lean's potential, the tree assures him that he will discover the staff's true power as he uses it. Impatient, Lean asks the tree to explain the staff's powers to save time, but the tree insists it's not necessary, as the answers will come naturally. As Lean grumbles, the tree notes that his talent and temperament remind it of a lunatic guardian it encountered 100 years ago. Convinced that Lean, like a hero from a manhwa, is a true guardian, the tree anticipates a bright future for him. At dawn, the tree tells the students to prepare to return to the academy. Without wasting time, the dryad tree uses magic to expel the students from its space, and warns Lean and the others not to use their magic nearby, as it is too strong and could awaken the nearby trees. When Lean asks how they are supposed to leave the area, the tree ignores him and places them outside the inner forest. Upon landing, the students quickly get up and brush the dirt off their clothes. Before disappearing, the tree tells Lean to remember the riddle it gave him, as it will answer many of his questions in life. With that, the tree vanishes, and Lean's group explores the area, only to find the undead are gone. As they descend the mountain, they discuss the strange experience from the previous night with a student, even wondering if it was all a dream, like something out of a fantasy manhwa. When they finally return to their dorms, Lean drags his exhausted body to his bed and collapses into sleep. Minutes later, Asan rushes to Lean's room, banging on the door and waking him up. When Lean opens it, Asan apologizes for the disturbance and informs him that the headmaster has summoned everyone outside. Lean's sleepiness vanishes as he wonders if the headmaster, a classic manhwa authority figure, is planning something. is trying to identify the students who attempted to escape. Pushing his doubts aside, Lean gets ready, telling Asan that he will wake the others and join him outside. Upon going out, Lean's group is surprised to find the atmosphere is festive. Most of the students have confused expressions, and Lean wonders why the academy would throw an impromptu festival, a common trope in many a school-life manhwa, without notifying the freshmen. Based on the atmosphere, it doesn't seem like the headmaster is planning anything suspicious, but Lean still can't help but speculate about his motives. A few minutes later, the headmaster appears and gathers everyone's attention to introduce 3 priests from the Empire who are visiting for the weekend. After the introduction, the headmaster encourages the students to applaud, which they do. However, Lean finds it's strange that such a grand reception is being held for 3 imperial priests. Deciding to stay on his guard, he resolves to observe the situation carefully after the applause. One of the priests thanks Headmaster Hugo Adals for honoring them despite his busy schedule, teaching the students. The headmaster responds politely and takes the opportunity to ask the priest to deliver a message to the emperor, a request to increase the budget allocated for excavating ancient magic. Blushing, the priestess replies that such matters are not within her jurisdiction. Hearing this, Lihan suddenly understands the headmaster's motives. He recalls the teachers from his past life, begging the government for subsidies when facing budget constraints. It seems this world, much like in a manhwa, operates in a similar fashion. Putting his thoughts aside, Lihan listens as the priestess thanks the headmaster for allowing her to meet his students. Representing different orders, she and the other priests feel privileged to be able to present their beliefs to the young mages. As Lihan observes the priests, a classic setup in this manhwa, he begins to question if they are truly ordinary clerics, as their incredible mana and unique presence set them apart from other mages. Sensing Lihan's curiosity, the headmaster startles him and explains why the priest's mana feels special. It comes from their divine power. The headmaster then notices Lihan's ability to detect mana and asks him about it. Lihan tries to downplay his ability, but the headmaster insists, wondering why he would hide such a talent. He comments that few students possess the mana sensitivity Lihan has, and advises him to embrace his abilities with confidence, like a true manhwa protagonist. This surprises Lihan, but he remains cautious, unsure of the headmaster's intentions. The headmaster adds that students like Lihan and himself, being too intelligent to believe in gods, naturally have no interest in faith. This reminds Lihan of the comments his father made disparagingly about divine power, considering the rumors about his family's contempt for priests. Lihan decides to keep his surname a secret to maintain good relations with the clerics. Changing the subject, the headmaster mocks the orders, stating that they make absurd efforts to win over students who can be swayed by food. Thinking about the food, Lihan jokingly asks the headmaster which orders he would recommend. Instead of answering, the headmaster pauses, impressed by the bold idea of joining multiple orders to take advantage of them. Although bewildered, the headmaster acknowledges Lian's intelligence and determination, finding his wit and audacity both amusing and impressive. In response to Lihan's question, the headmaster recommends he join the Pringa Order, a group where the rule is self-sacrifice. The headmaster assures Lihan they will welcome him warmly, and if he's not satisfied with them, suggests the Colossus Order, as they worship a god who embraces chaos and change, and wouldn't care if Lihan believes in another god or not. Finally, the headmaster suggests the Capo Order, which worships the god of swordsmen and would likely accept an eccentric person like Lihan. Hearing this, Lihan wonders if the headmaster knows about his attendance in swordsmanship classes. If that's the case, it's not good, as he never had good experiences with teachers who paid him too much attention in his past life, a recurring theme in this manhwa. After thanking the director for his recommendations, Lean receives news that the director will now meet with the students in the punishment room. Lean bids him farewell, and the director hopes Lean makes wise decisions in the future. As the director disappears, Lean recalls what he said about the punishment room and wonders if he was referring to the tiger guys. If so, Lean needs to be cautious to avoid revealing his secret, a classic manhwa protagonist dilemma. Shortly after the director leaves, Joner calls out to Lean asking where he's going. Lean quickly hides his worried expression and tells her he plans to visit the Pringa Order. Intrigued by his plans, Joner listens as Lean mentions his intention to visit the Colossus and Capo Orders next. Curious, Joner listens as Lean mentions his intention to visit the Colossus and Capo Orders next, when Lean asks her where she got such a precious item. Joner reveals it's from the Flying Order, which worships the god of alchemy. Her family had donated a lot of money to the order a long time ago, and when she arrived, they recognized her and gave her the food basket. Upon hearing this, Lean can't believe his ears and laments coming from such a stingy family that was too arrogant to donate money to any order. If his family had done that, It would have been much easier to find a favorable order in this manhwa. Joner, puzzled by Lean's odd behavior, wonders why he's acting so strangely after hearing about her family's donations. Lean quickly brushes it off, deciding to leave as he's busy for the day. After saying goodbye to Joner, Lean heads towards the Pringa Order's tent and introduces himself as someone seeking the teachings of Lord Pringa. The followers welcome him warmly and, after thanking him for his visit, invite him into their tent. Lean continues to charm them with kind words as he enters. As he does, he sees one of the hooded followers call for a person named Diling to assist them. Upon seeing Diling, Lean immediately recognizes her as a blood demon of the Mista. Mista blood demons are an extremely rare race among mixed bloods, a fascinating concept for any fantasy manhwa, born from contracts their ancestors made with demons. Despite their appearance, these demons usually have passive personalities and are often shunned by society, a tragic backstory that adds depth to this manhwa. The hooded follower introduces Diling as the new student from the Tower of the Blazing Phoenix. The follower then expresses surprise at finding another believer besides Diling, but Lean replies that it's only natural to follow their lord once one knows his noble will. Of course, Lean has ulterior motives, but he knows there are two things to consider when joining an order in this manhwa world: what one can gain, and what one must do to win their favor. At first glance, the Pringa order doesn't seem like much, but Lean senses a multitude of mana-filled artifacts inside the tent, a detail that enriches the world-building of this manhwa. The sheer number of artifacts makes him wonder if the order is involved in artifact creation. Just then, Madame Madrid, one of the priestesses from before, enters the tent, delighted to find a new believer. Lean notices that despite her small frame, her footsteps leave heavy imprints on the ground, a curious detail in this manhwa. Curious, he tries to figure out the reason for this. After he introduces himself, Madrid notices his worried expression and reassures him, telling him the heavy footsteps are due to an artifact she's wearing. She explains it's a cursed artifact that increases the wearer's body weight drastically. When Lean asks why she would use such an artifact, Madrid replies that it's for Lord Pringa. She explains that since Pringa bore the world's pain alone, a common theme in this manhwa, they too must share his suffering. To do so, they use cursed artifacts and endure the hardship. Hearing this, Lean starts to regret listening to the director's recommendation. Sensing his discomfort, Madrid gives him the option to leave if he's unwilling to walk the same path, as it is a difficult one. Given the chance to opt out, Lean accepts it and prepares to leave. However, before he gets too far, Madrid expresses disappointment, revealing she had prepared an artifact as a welcome gift for him. Although it's called an artifact, it might not be desirable for everyone, as it absorbs mana. When Lean hears about mana absorption, he stops, realizing such an artifact could be useful for managing his immense mana, a classic manhwa power-up. Recognizing the potential benefits, he turns around and asks what other effects the cursed artifact has besides absorbing mana. If it has a curse, it probably has other functions, and Lean wants to know them all before accepting it. Madrid, confused at first, proceeds to explain the cursed object's original effect. Like action and reaction, there are cases where a strong curse enhances an artifact's effects. Examining the artifact Madrid is wearing, it seems to be affected by the weight increase curse. However, its effect is equally powerful, a divine power augmentation worthy of a top-tier manhwa. Following this logic, Madrid explains to Lean that his artifact has invisibility magic. Still, she points out that its most significant drawback is its excessive absorption of the user's mana, as she continues to list its disadvantages. Lean politely interrupts, expressing his readiness to accept the consequences. His enthusiasm impresses Madrid so much that she feels ashamed for doubting his sincere faith and assuming he would walk away after hearing about the curse. Meanwhile, Lean is ecstatic, realizing he's stumbled upon the perfect artifact to gain invisibility, a game-changing item in any manhwa. After the emotional exchange, Madrid officially welcomes Lean to their order and reveals the cursed artifact, which turns out to be Lord Pringa's belt. The belt, which glows purple, is presented in a box, and Lean immediately puts it on. Watching him, the two hooded followers suspect that, being a new believer, Lean might struggle with the artifact's negative effects, so they prepare to assist him if needed. However, to their surprise, nothing happens when Lean puts on the belt, subverting their expectations for this manhwa. Instead, he eagerly asks how to activate the invisibility magic. Hearing the followers' disbelieving murmurs, Lean turns to Madrid and asks if there's any problem he should be worried about. Madrid, snapping out of her shock, lets out a nervous laugh and reassures him, assuring him that everything is fine. She directs him to the manual inside the box for instructions on how to activate the invisibility spell. Inwardly, she marvels at how fortunate they are to have received such a brother. So incredible, sent by his lord. Lean finds the spell guide inside the box, reads it, and recites the incantation to activate the belt's power, and instantly vanishes, leaving Madrid and the followers astonished. Thrilled by the artifact's impressive effect, Lean marvels at how well it works, like something straight out of a power fantasy manhwa. After savoring the thrill of invisibility, he recites the cancellation spell and reappears, surprising everyone. Now, confident in the artifact's capabilities, he begins to wonder if the cursed effect is even noticeable, since he hasn't felt any adverse impact yet. Reasoning that if the effects are this mild, he could try using more cursed items, he asks Madrid for additional cursed artifacts. However, Madrid, after a dramatic pause, advises him not to push his luck, and insists it's too soon for him to take on more cursed items. Despite his best attempts to persuade her, she refuses. Later, during a class on the Lord's teachings, Lean reflects on how useful the belt will be in helping him escape the academy. His thoughts are interrupted when Madrid concludes her lecture for the day. After thanking her for her teachings, Lean reflects on what he has learned and concludes that anything is possible, as long as one is willing to equip a cursed item. Before letting him go, Madrid offers him a basket of food, explaining that she thought he might need it. Touched by her thoughtful gesture, Lean is nearly moved to tears and expresses his gratitude as he takes the basket. Suddenly, Dialing approaches and also offers him a food basket. Confused, Lean asks her why she's giving it to him. Dialing explains that as Pringa's servant, she has no need for such extravagances. Madrid tries to call her back, but Dialing leaves. Shortly after, Lean, impressed by her dedication to her beliefs, observes how different the members of the Blazing Phoenix Tower are, noting that in any other manhwa, they would be the complete opposite of the other factions. Just as he's about to leave, Madrid asks him for a favor, to look after Dialing, as she's worried the half-demon is being too hard on herself. Initially reluctant, Lean explains that he lives in a different dormitory. However, Madrid bribes him with another food basket and Lean agrees to help. On his way back to the academy, Lean chats with Dialing and asks if he can call the priestess. Dialing replies that he can simply call her by her name. Curious, Lean asks about her tower, mentioning he's heard rumors that its members rarely interact with others, unlike those from other towers. This popular manhwa trope is always interesting. They mostly pray in their rooms or venture into the forest or mountains at night to pray. This confuses Lean, as he knows there's a weekday curfew for the INR guard dormitory. It turns out that the members of the Blazing Phoenix Tower are exempt from such rules due to their dormitory's unique circumstances. Realizing this, Lean deduces that the priests aren't subject to time restrictions, and if he could dress in a priest's robes and impersonate one, a classic manhwa protagonist move, he could gain more freedom for himself. This entire plot feels like it's building up to a major manhwa story arc. Help him get a priest's robe. Dialing, bewildered, reminds him that wearing a priest's robes won't reduce the effects of the curse. Lean assures her he's aware of that, but lies, claiming that she needs the robe to better understand Mr. Pringa, who won't be able to refuse her. Dylan promises to bring him one the next time they meet. Lean thanks her for her help and decides to take things slow while preparing for his eventual escape from the academy. Continuing the conversation, Lean asks about her eating habits to see if she's eating enough, and Dylan says she's satisfied with what she has for now. Upon hearing this, Lean tells her about the priestess's concerns for her health and how she asked him to make sure she was well taken care of. A sweet moment in this manhwa. To make things much easier, Lean suggests that Dylan eat with him occasionally, so the priestess will worry less. After thinking for a moment about the proposal, Dylan finally agrees to eat with him. Lean feels happy to see that Dylan is cooperating, as he wouldn't want to disappoint the person who gave him such valuable gifts. Besides, once she starts eating with him, she'll have no choice but to become addicted to him feeding her, even during the holidays. As night falls, the academy's professors gather in the meeting room for an emergency meeting called by the director on such short notice. A classic manhwa setup. Shortly before the meeting begins, Wallen takes a sip of the delicious tea she prepared with herbs from her garden and enjoys how good it has tasted since they arrived. Just as she's savoring the moment, the director appears to start the meeting. When Uragon asks why they are all gathered, Garcia comments that it's probably about the basic writing training. Shortly after, he asks the director if the class professor has been assigned yet, but then someone who has apparently been living under a rock asks why Professor Vendel isn't teaching at the moment. Garcia tells him that Professor Vendel disappeared while searching for a unicorn, and since there's no news of him, they need a replacement for his class, a typical manhwa adventure subplot. At that moment, the director interrupts Garcia and tells the other professors not to worry, as he has already prepared a replacement. Surprised by the sudden announcement, the professors praise the director for finding such a quick solution to their problems. Uragon then asks the director who the new professor is, a pivotal question in this manhwa arc, and he reveals that the professor's name is Lightning Step, ZROZ, for short. Although Garcia hasn't seen the person before, he wishes the professor luck in her new class. The manhwa then shows the director explaining how famous Zeroz is as an adventurer, according to the history books, as she has explored most of the deserts within the empire, and doesn't stop there. Just at that moment, Uragon slams his hand on the table, complaining in pain, and asks the director why it had to be her and why he hired his aunt. The others, confused, watch as Uragon explains the horrible behaviors of his terrible aunt. This manhwa really knows how to introduce chaotic characters, sometimes even asking him if he hates Eastern dwarves. After hearing everything Uragon had to say, the director tells him that he doesn't really care who his professors are, as long as they are the best in their field, a mindset that causes a lot of drama in this manhwa, which means he can't do anything about it now. With that said, he ends the meeting and dismisses the professors to continue their evening. The next day, a familiar dwarf woman is found at the top of a tree while receiving a message from one of his little messenger birds. After hearing the message, he realizes it's almost time for his class, so he prepares accordingly before the students arrive. Approximately 30 minutes later, the students from the Blue Dragon and White Tiger Towers swarm the field, excited to finally learn a mandatory skill a noble person must know: horseback riding. Lean notices the positive energy emanating from his peers and thinks that things should go smoothly for this class, since the content of this lesson is something the students are already familiar with. This class should be pretty calm, however, seconds after thinking that, a large and ferocious bird roars in the sky and hovers over the field where the students are. As soon as they hear the strange shrieks and sounds, the students get confused, trying to figure out where those sounds are coming from. Just at that moment, someone signals for everyone to look up at the sky, and when they do, they see the large bird diving towards them to pick one of them up. The students run for safety, but unfortunately, Gondo is too foolish to listen to reason, so he gets caught by the bird's talons and is carried off somewhere else. Realizing Gando has been taken, Lean quickly takes control, urging everyone to calm down, crouch down and avoid moving so as not to attract the bird's attention. After that, he starts to think how desensitized he is to these kinds of situations, much like a seasoned manhwa protagonist. Seconds later, the bird returns for its next victim, and Lean begins to wonder where the bird came from. Just then, an angry female student from the White Tiger Tower stands up and demands to know where the headmaster is, since it's now quite obvious that something is wrong with the academy's security. The person crouching near her tries to calm her down, as this is not the time for finger-pointing, but the foolish girl starts blaming the monster bird's attacks, a dramatic turn common in this manhwa, on the academy's lack of security. Her screams soon attract the bird, which approaches them. Realizing the foolish scene she has caused, the girl starts to apologize and beg for help. Fortunately for her, the bird takes the poor guy who was crouching near her. Witnessing what just happened, Lean finds it strange that the bird didn't take the fool who caused the commotion. After thinking for a bit, he finally finds the answer to his question. All this time, it's their hair color. With the quick thinking of a manhwa hero, Lean quickly orders everyone to cover their hair with their uniforms, as he has evidence that the bird only attacks those with bright hair. Shortly after they cover their hair, a voice from within the crowd of students behind Lean compliments him for being quick to make decisions and give instructions. Turning to get a better look at the person, Lean demands that he introduce himself. At that moment, the person removes his cloak to reveal he is from the White Tiger Tower. But just as he's about to introduce himself, a coward from the Blue Dragon Tower yells and accuses the White Tiger student of trying to mess with Barks, setting up a classic manhwa conflict. Again, the student tries to defend himself, but it's already too late, as the fools are already preparing to strike Mora's follower. Before things can get out of hand, the guy shouts, assuring them he has nothing to do with Marat's side. With no one willing to believe him, Princess Ardeen intervenes and gets him out of trouble. Seeing the princess speak in his favor, the students stand down and return to their activities after the commotion subsides. Lean asks the princess how she knows this strange guy, and the stranger introduces himself as Rowena, a knight who serves the princess. Hearing this, Lean considers the odds, and soon realizes that the princess must have exploited loopholes in the school's rules. While no one can bring their servant, the academy can't stop servants from enrolling as students, which means clever people can use this method to bring someone along. A classic trope in many a manhwa. Knowing this, Lean suddenly feels sorry for poor Gando, who has no one to protect him, even though they are both royalty. After explaining the unpredictable nature of the bird that attacked them, Rowena asks Lean to take command of the students and use them to stop the bird. Surprised, Lean asks Rowena why he should handle such a difficult task. Just then, The other students from the Azure Dragon Tower begin to praise him, telling him he's someone they can trust and encouraging him to lead them like a true manhwa protagonist. In his mind, Lean forbids himself from succumbing to their pleas, as he knows that nothing good has ever come from being the leader of a group. Unfortunately for him, it becomes impossible to refuse the request when the entire field begins to chant for him to be their commander, insisting they are ready to follow him. Unable to resist, Lean sighs and reluctantly begins to give orders to his new army, demonstrating his leadership skills. Rowena recalls the breakdown she had in her tower a few days ago when she discovered that the person who was leading the Azure Dragon Tower was Leon War, not the princess. Back then, she wondered how that had happened, given the princess's exceptional command skills, even before she entered the academy. To find out the reason why Lean is the leader, she planned this encounter under the current circumstances to put Lean in the spotlight and hope he would make a mistake. Now that she is a few steps closer to her goal, Rowena watches with anticipation, hoping to uncover Lean's secret. This is a pivotal moment in any good manhwa. What she doesn't realize is that he has earned everyone's loyalty with nothing more than some food. Before executing his plan, Lean asks if anyone has a shiny object, and someone soon hands him a mirror, which Lean takes, then aims the reflective part of the mirror towards the sky, using the glare to attract the monstrous bird. When the bird sees the shiny object, it dives towards Lean fast and furious like a fool. Before the bird gets too close, Lean tells his group to get in line and form a wall. When they do, Lean hides behind them and asks them to wait for his signal before moving. As the bird gets close enough, Lean steps out and casts the illumination spell using his new staff and scares the bird away. Shortly after, the students finally breathe a sigh of relief, thanking Lean Warden for overcoming their doubts and achieving a great success. Even the students from the White Tiger Tower have no choice but to acknowledge his greatness in this epic manhwa moment. Over Lean after the brave feat he performed. Before getting too excited, Lean asks everyone what they think will happen to Gando and the other boy who was snatched by the bird. Just at that moment, Lean hears sounds of a struggle in the nearby trees, a classic manhwa setup. A moment later, both Gando and Silver Hair fall and are caught by the other students. As for the frightened bird, it flies back to its owner, Seth, who pets it and finally agrees to go to the lesson grounds with it. Once she's ready, she jumps from the tall tree she was in and lands with a thud. Then she introduces herself to the young students who are just as confused as anyone would be seeing a stranger jump out of a tree and say hello. Lean thinks about how strange it is for her to appear out of nowhere and wonders if the whole charade with the bird was orchestrated by her. Looking closer at the woman, Lean notices a certain familiarity between her and Yugen and wonders if she's a relative of the professor. As he's convincing himself that's not possible, the short woman appears behind him and tells him he has a lot of potential. Lean gets the same feeling he had with Urugum during alchemy class a few weeks ago, and wonders if he's experiencing déjà vu, a common trope in many a manhwa. While the other students wonder who this short woman is, Lean asks if she's close with Professor Yugen. Seth smiles, surprised that he could figure it out after just a few minutes of interaction. She finally tells Lean that she is his aunt, and Lean immediately becomes wary, trying not to stand out any more than he already has in front of this strange professor. Just when he thought he could stay under the radar, one of the goons from the Blue Dragon Tower claps him on the back and informs the professor that Lean is Urugum's top student. Not only that, but the goon also mentions that Lean gets invited to Jim's cabin from time to time, something Lean desperately tries to stop him from saying. Hearing about Lean's familiarity with her nephew, Seth asks Lean to confirm if it's true, and his mission changes to at least making a good impression on the professor. Lean admits that the student was right. The monstrous bird returns and lands, and Seth gets the student's attention to begin the lesson. To start, she introduces herself as Lightspear Seth and explains that their actual professor, Professor Vendel, went missing while searching for a unicorn, which is why she is filling in for him. Once she finishes her introduction, the students recall all the remarkable things she's done in the past, like defeating Betty and exploring the Crater of Spirits, a feat no one else has ever managed in this manhwa's world. To start the class, Seth asks the students to guess why she brought a Thunderbird to class. For context, the Thunderbird is a massive monster, a staple of many a fantasy manhwa, with aggressive tendencies and the ability to control lightning, thunder, and whirlwinds, hence its name. Lean racks his brain trying to figure out her reasoning, but then a student asks if the semester's goal is for them to ride the Thunderbird. Seth laughs heartily and tells them they wouldn't be able to ride such a monstrous bird, a challenge often seen in a manhwa, not even if they had a decade to try, so that isn't the reason. She then asks the students to guess again. Lean suggests it's to see how they respond when they encounter a dangerous monster. Rowena scoffs at his lazy guess, dismissing it as wrong, but to Lean's surprise, Seth confirms that he's correct. She finally understands why Uru likes him so much. Continuing with the lesson, Seth explains that you can't predict what kinds of dangers students might encounter while traveling, so they need proper training, a common theme in this type of manhwa. Don't worry, she assures them, as the core of her class is simply horseback riding. For now, they will head to the stables with Barta managing the students and helping with future lessons. At this point, Leon has no choice but to accept her new reality. On the way to the stables, Seth explains that the horse is the most basic animal for riding in the Empire, and says that anyone who can't ride a horse will have difficulty learning to ride other animals. To ride more difficult animals, they must first master horseback riding. As the lesson progresses, Leon notices that her classmates are getting bored, as they are already familiar with horseback riding. At one point, Seth stops and smiles warmly at Leanne. If there's one thing Leanne knows about teachers' smiles, it's that they only make them when they have something mischievous in mind. Suspicious, she warns John to be careful, suspecting this manhwa lesson won't just be about riding horses. When they arrive at the Inar stables, Seth gives them a warm welcome to see the incredible horses found there. The students admire the thoroughbred horses and ask if they will be able to ride them. Seth replies that a good horse must be earned. Rummaging through her bag, she pulls out a cup with sticks and instructs the students to draw one to determine the order for choosing their horses. After the draw, Gando is the first to choose. However, when the other nobles complain that the foolish prince is going first, despite knowing nothing about horses, Gando retorts with some disparaging remarks and rushes to choose one of the most aggressive horses in the stable. John and Leanne immediately notice the aggression in the horse's questioning eyes. Ignorantly, he declares that a horse must be large and strong to be worthy of him. Thinking the horse is greeting him, Gando approaches to pet it, only to be struck in the face by the horse's strong jaw. Within seconds, Gando falls to the stable floor, bleeding from his nose and mouth. Fortunately, he will survive, but the nobles he previously insulted get the last laugh. One of them, thinking he knows how to choose a more docile horse, approaches a smaller, lighter one and pets it. Unfortunately for him, the horse bites his head, leaving him begging for help. Shortly after, a student from the White Tiger Tower starts to boast to the students of the Blue Dragon Tower with arrogance. However, when he tries to control his horse, he ends up running through the stable, chased by the aggressive beast, a scene worthy of an action manhwa. While observing the chaos, Leon wonders why the horses are so aggressive over such minor provocations. After calming down from her laughter, Seth finally speaks up and reminds them that she told them to learn how to ride horses and then gives them their first assignment, to befriend the aggressive horses in the stable. Shortly after, the students begin to complain about how harsh Seth is, but she assures them that the horses will become friendly if they are treated with love and care. Their main goal for this lesson is to bond with a horse of their choice, a classic manhwa challenge. Leanne observes the horses again and realizes they are definitely not normal, a typical setup in a monster manhwa. Something about them seems strange, and he suspects Seth isn't telling them everything. However, before he can pick the most docile horse, Seth points him out from the crowd and leads him to a special horse. Leanne immediately falls in love with it. Seth explains that she couldn't just give any horse to her nephew's favorite student, so she chose this one for him. At this point, envy begins to grow, with San becoming jealous of Leanne for receiving such favoritism, a classic manhwa trope. One of the students from the White Tiger Tower complains that Leanne is getting an easier horse, but Seth declares that although the horse she's giving Leanne is a good one, it's also the most aggressive and difficult to tame in the stables. In her words, it's easier to tame a monster in this manhwa world than to tame this specimen of a horse. Leanne, understandably devastated upon hearing this, wonders why Seth is continuing. Leanne asks if there's any bonus for taking on the most difficult task among his peers. Seth assures him he'll be fine, reminding him that he handled the Thunderdome well previously. That said, Leanne remembers why he hates being the center of attention, but he keeps a smile on his face until the class ends for the day. A few hours after class, Seth forces Leanne to take her to Uragan's cabin to see her favorite nephew again. The manhwa then gives us a perfectly awkward family reunion. Seth scolds him for his rudeness, reminding him that she is his aunt. Shaken, Uragan greets her properly, and Seth immediately invites herself on a tour of his home. Once inside, Uragan asks Leon to explain, and Leon tells him he had no choice but to guide her. Meanwhile, Seth starts complaining about how dirty and messy Uragan's cabin is, even suggesting that's why he's still single. Uragan knows this is just one of her mood swings, so he remains calm, waiting for an opportunity to shut her up. As she's about to ask about his romantic life, Uragan quickly changes the subject, declaring it's time for lunch and asking Leon if he's eaten yet. Leanne, understanding the situation like a seasoned manhwa protagonist, says he's very hungry. Uragan immediately sits him down and offers to prepare lunch for the three of them. Seth agrees that Leanne, being a growing boy, shouldn't skip meals. To help her misguided nephew, she insists on preparing some Eastern-style dishes for all of them. Uragan is about to object, mentioning he doesn't like Eastern food, but a stern look from his aunt is enough to make him keep quiet and act normal. While Seth prepares lunch, Uragan takes the opportunity to ask Leanne how he's been. Before Leanne can answer, something shiny on Leanne's robe catches his eye and he asks about it. Leanne remembers that's where his staff is, so he takes it out and shows it to Uragan. Urugan, sensing the forest spirit within the staff, asks Leon where he got it. This manhwa is building up the item's mystique, and Leon knows he can't admit he found the oak spirit while trying to escape, so he tells them that, coincidentally, he wandered into the forest, met the oak spirit, and coincidentally, found the staff. Uragan and his aunt pretend to believe his story, but as the manhwa shows, they know Leanne was trying to escape. Uragan then asks if the spirit of the oak gave him a riddle, and Lean asks how he knew. Urugum explains that the spirit is well known for its annoying but witty personality, and Lean then wonders if the staff, like in many a fantasy manhwa, has some kind of special power, especially considering how Urugum talks as if the spirit were hidden inside the staff, a classic trope in this kind of manhwa. After imagining the possible benefits like invincibility or the ability to use spirit magic, Seth tells him that yes, the staff has a special effect, a twist you might find in a slice-of-life manhwa. It is excellent for farming. Lean is disappointed by his answer, as he was hoping for something much more exciting, a common reaction for a manhwa protagonist. However, since the staff comes from a tree spirit, it makes sense that it would excel in caring for nature.